Good afternoon. I'm going to call the budget work session to order. It is May 9th, 2012. Will you please rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Francisco, Hotchkiss,
Here.
House, Murillo,
Here.
Rouse, White, and Mayor Schneider.
Here. I don't see any public comment slips for items not on the agenda, so we'll close public comment and move over to Chief DeMizio for the Fire Department.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Fire Chief Andy DeMizio here today, along with Administrative Services Manager Ron Lichty, to present the Fire Department's proposed budget for fiscal year 2013. We have a streamlined presentation for you today because this is the second year of a two-year budget. It's nice to be able to use the large font and only have 3 items to present. I'll be presenting an basic overview of the Fire Department. Then Ron will be taking over to present the main nuts and bolts of our budget. And I'll come back in and talk a little bit about some of our Fire Department key performance indicators for 12 and 13. You can see here the Fire Department has 110 authorized positions. Breakdown in terms of classification: 9 are managers, 95 are in the fire bargaining unit, and 6 are general employees. The Fire Department has 6 programs, 3 main programs and 3 subset type programs. Administration, operations. Under operations is our airport rescue firefighting. Prevention division has also the Prevention Fire Marshal's Office, the Prevention Bureau, and also has the Office of Emergency Services and the Wildland Mitigation Group. This is a breakdown of the Fire Department's organization. You can see that the administration's at the top there. We have a very thin administration for our 110 employees. We have a total of 6 employees that are in the administration. I have 1 executive assistant who handles confidential matters. And then you go down there to the Administrative Services Manager. That's Ron's area. He has a warehouse specialist who handles our logistical needs, an administrative specialist, and an office specialist, too. This staffing is very similar to what we had in the past, so we haven't lost any more positions from where we were at about 111 positions about 2 years ago. If you go over to the left-hand side, you'll see our prevention division. That's Joe Poray. He's our fire marshal. Joe has the key members of the Fire Prevention Bureau are the Inspector 3 and 3 Inspector 2s, along with administrative specialist. The Fire Prevention handles all of our plans reviews. They handle all the fire and life safety issues that we have in the city. They conduct fire investigations, and they are what I like to call the brains of the outfit. So they are very much handling the code and life safety issues underneath administration. You also see off to the left there is our emergency services manager. That's Yolanda McGlinchey. She works across all city departments, provides emergency training. She manages our emergency operating plans for the city. She makes sure that our emergency operating center, which is located at Fire Station 1, is ready to go at a moment's notice. All the disaster service training for the entire city is handled under her. Ron will talk a little bit more about the allocated funds that go to that position from across the city. And then down there, still on the left-hand side under prevention, the Wildland Inspector 2 and Fire Services Specialists. They handle all of our wildland fire mitigation throughout the city. First position is staffed by Ann Marks. She handles citywide wildland issues. And so we have, you'll see later on a map, and you'll see we have wildland areas that are in the coastal area. The second position is a fire service specialist, and that position is funded through our wildland fire suppression assessment district funds. That's a mouthful of words, but that's our benefit assessment fund that's strictly in our foothill and extreme foothill area. And you'll be seeing that a little bit later on. We'll be going to council to have that renewed, that district renewed. So that district has been extremely beneficial to the community. On the heels of the T fire, the Hezecita fire, they've continued to do great work. Recently, they've hit all-time highs for vegetation management chipping. Over 500 tons have been pulled out of there just in the last year alone. They've been successful in getting grant funds to stretch the general fund subsidy that the council has given this area that almost matches actually what we get through the assessment fund. So a lot of great work is being done there to better prepare our community. In addition to the vegetation management, the chipping services, roadside clearance is taking place. The chipping is extremely popular, and it seems like every year we get more and more neighbors working with that. We also do neighborhood fuels treatment through that, and we just completed the second of 4 different neighborhood fuels treatments for over 22 acres in the last year alone. So what we've done is taken what we have had, been able to take advantage of from the fires, and continue a swath of fuel treatment above the city of Santa Barbara. Fantastic benefit to the city. Now on the left-hand side, you'll see the operations, and that's what, when people think of the fire department, they think of our operations group. They're the guys on the red fire trucks that staff all of our 8 fire stations, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all the time. It's headed up by Operations Chief Pat McElroy. Underneath Pat are 4 battalion chiefs. 3, we work in a shift schedule, and we have 3 shift battalion chiefs and a training battalion chief. The training battalion chief and the training captain have proven to be critical positions to us in the fire department. As we've been moving ahead, fire departments have so many regulations and requirements similar to the police department. Those guys are working unbelievable output from that division, making sure that we meet all the qualifications and we stay safe as a department. So they handle a lot of our risk management issues for me also. A lot of administrative work gets done by those 2 positions underneath. Just a little bit more about operations. You can see here that this is the distribution of our fire stations throughout Santa Barbara, along with the airport station that we staff out at the airport. This distribution, along with a constant staffing type of way we do our staffing, I'll talk about that in a second, gives us excellent response data. In the last year, we're projecting to run about 7,800 calls this year, which is pretty much consistent. We haven't seen a great increase in calls. Santa Barbara's fairly built out, and we have a static call load. Although I could anticipate it growing slightly, perhaps due to baby boomer and additional needs for medical emergencies. The fire department runs more than 70% of our calls are for medical emergencies, so that's the bulk of our emergency response. The remainder, actually only 3 to 4% of it's actually for fires. But as you know, those 3 to 4% are high risk, high loss type situations. So we're very fortunate to have fast.
Chief, forgive me, would you repeat those percentages?
Over 70% of our calls are for medical emergencies.
Okay, that's what I thought, okay.
But we're an all-risk fire department, so we respond to all kinds of any emergency that could be. We have a hazardous materials response team. We have an urban search and rescue team. We're looking at expanding our services to assist the waterfront for in-water rescues. So the operations group is going gangbusters, too. They're really doing good work. At a time when a lot of agencies are having to throttle back, we've been actually able to move forward by good collaborative work between labor and management with operations. I mentioned constant staffing. This is the staffing model that we use in Santa Barbara, and it's currently a part of a MOU extension that we have with 525, our labor group. You can see here that we have 29 firefighters available per shift every day. And 3 of those are out at the airport. So within Santa Barbara proper, you have 26 firefighters ready to respond at a moment's notice. Now, to have constant staffing requires that we have to backfill when firefighters are sick or injured. In the days years past, we used to have extra firefighters. We called them suitcase firefighters, relief firefighters. We found that it was a good way to kind of have additional people. Those days are gone primarily because of the cost of the benefits that we have to pay for firefighters. We found it's more cost-effective to straight out hire firefighters on overtime to backfill behind missing firefighters rather than to have extra firefighters. And this was something that we worked in conjunction, once again, with the labor group, because when you have fewer firefighters, that means more firefighters have to work overtimes. So there's kind of a sliding scale benefit point where you're going to kind of want to go. You don't want to have too few firefighters because the guys that are on duty, they're working overtimes again and again. They can get burned out and they can be difficult to find when they're off duty. So my goal is to kind of find that happy ground where we have full staffing, but we're able to get people to come back on overtime. So these are kind of some of the things we have to look at when we.
Mr. White has a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's an interesting point there, Chief, about at some point the department chose not to hire suitcase firefighters, or there was an attrition, and then so how much more expensive is it to be hiring another firefighter than it is to be, maybe this is the answer is much more complicated, but how much more expensive is it to have another firefighter on duty rather than be doing the overtime? Is there a ballpark percentage?
Councilmember White, Madam Mayor, we've looked at this and we figured that the ratio is about 1.7 when you add on all the costs, indirect costs and otherwise for a firefighter versus 1.5 to hire a firefighter at overtime. And I think you'll see I think Ron is going to talk a little bit about some of the savings that we've seen by doing this and by reducing our injury and illness time.
So do I understand 1.5 compared to 1.7? So it's 0.2 is the difference?
0.2, and it depends on the PERS costs and the costs for medical. And so as those costs go up, it's actually more favorable to hire fewer firefighters.
To hire which? Fewer?
To hire fewer, yes.
Okay, thank you.
But at the same time, we want to make sure that we've got the coverage for the city because that's what provides us with the excellent response times. I mean, this city has response times to medical emergencies, for instance, in under 4 minutes or less 80% of the time. Our average response time to all Code 3 emergencies is under 3 minutes. Now, those are fantastic statistics and worthy of a world-class city that we have here. So that's what we have with this fire department. Now, I mentioned some of the impacts to staffing, and I wanted to show you this slide because those of you who remember last year's presentation, it wasn't, we didn't have a great story to tell last year because if you look at this trend, you can see that peak that we had last year in 2011, and this is for about the first 9 months of the year, so we tried to compare it evenly across. But you'll see this year we've got about 5,000 fewer hours? 5,000. About 5,000 fewer hours in lost time to date, which is very notable. I can't really take a lot of credit for that, although we've tried to do some good things in management to change this tide. But a lot of older firefighters have retired. They use a proportionately greater amount of injury time. They get injured more easily. And close to that last year retirement, when they've been on for more than 30 years, there's no incentive for them to save their sick leave time. So we have sick leave management issues. But this year we're doing much better, and that less 5,000 hours equates back into savings that we've seen in our budget. So almost every 1,000 hour, every 10 hours of every hour of overtime, you could probably say, if you rated it across the board, would be about $45 an hour, and that includes, if the captain rate is a little bit higher and the firefighter, so about $45 an hour on average for the overtimes. I'm going to hand it over to Ron now, unless you got any questions about the overview.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, City Council members. I'm here to talk about the numbers for the fire department's budget. Here's our appropriation request for fiscal year 13, $22,082,078. Our fire department is comprised of two funds, the general fund and the wildfire suppression assessment district fund. First thing I'll talk about is the general fund, our portion of the general fund. This pie chart demonstrates our request for fiscal year 13 recommended budget of $21,792,199. Our fund, we can look at it this way. This pie chart shows us looking at the fund by division, as Chief DeMizio was talking to us before. If we take our operations and suppressions, that's the lion's share of our budget, with airport rescue and firefighting, that comprises almost 90% of the budget. Guys and gals out there working the fires and responding to emergencies. The other 10% of the budget is split between prevention, administration is 3.5%, and emergency services and wildfire mitigation, the two of them is 2% of the budget. The staffing is also about the same. About 90% of the staff works in fire suppression and at the airport, and 10% of us work in the other areas. If we look at our appropriation request in terms of major object or cost categories, we can see that salaries and benefits is, again, about 89% of the budget. Allocated costs are 7%. Allocated costs are those costs that are charges for services that the fire department receives from other departments. And that's for things such as the fire station maintenance, our facilities maintenance, our fleet of fire department vehicles, both for their repair and maintenance and for their eventual replacement. We're funding for that every year. We also are allocated costs for our computer use, our information systems, communications, which includes radios, and insurances, such as liability insurance. Supplies and services, at 3% of the budget, well, that's most of the other costs for running the fire department. This is to pay for fire station utilities, office supplies, postage, equipment. Vehicle fuel is noteworthy here. We've seen the increase in fuel prices, and we had budgeted actually only about $68,000 in our current fiscal year 12. We're asking to approach $95,000 for the next year. That comes out of this area of supplies and services. We also have a training budget in here, not the overtime associated with training, but for the tuitions, the tuition and the cost to put on training and to go to trainings. This part of the budget also pays for the medical supplies we use, equipment repair, small tool purchases, things of that nature. And then rounding out the request is the equipment portion of the budget, 1% of the budget. This is where we purchase our personal protective equipment. That's the turnout suits and gear that the firefighters wear. It's also it's called SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus. That's the tanks they wear on their backs and the masks. Hose and ladders, fitness equipment, station appliances. We had to buy a $5,000 oven this year. The old one finally went out on us after about 25, 30 years. So that's where these costs go to. Now this slide, we talk about, this is a comparison over the last several years of the general fund's fire department's budget. And what I'd like us to look at, we have what our actual results from fiscal year 11. What I'd like to look at right now is the comparison of the adopted, what we are working in today, and our projected. You can see between these two bottom line numbers, we're going to be coming under budget, we think, about $250,000 this year. And much of this favorable variance is in the salaries and benefits category. And those are, again, as a result of those hours of sick and illness and injury time that we're not spending dollars on in overtime hours because we're not seeing those hours being accrued at this point. 5,000 hours equates to about $225,000 on the weighted average hourly salary of fire department personnel. The other cost categories are coming in right about budget. No intolerable differences there. So now let's take a look at fiscal year 13, our recommended budget, our $21 million budget compared to our adopted budget. This is about a 3% increase over fiscal year 12, about $700,000. Now, when the fiscal year, the two-year plan was adopted a year ago, that was actually a 4% increase. It's been reduced to only a 3% increase through recent adjustments, through status quo and finance adjustments. So it was actually about a $900,000 increase previously. But it's down to a $700,000 increase. And again, most of that money is found in the salaries and benefits line. And what's happened there is those increases, well, there's about 3 or 4 items that make up why that increased. For one, there's been salary step upgrades on people's salaries. 2, there's been our memorandum of understanding with the Firefighter Association. There's increases to their salaries that were negotiated at the bargaining table, so those are taking effect in fiscal year 13. Also in fiscal year 13, there was wage concessions that are going away, and so we're not getting the benefit of dollars that we were saving through wage concessions. And again, you've heard some of the story, retirement and medical health benefits have also increased in cost a little bit. So the combination of all those increases our salaries and benefits by the amount we see here. Also of note is the equipment line. We are going from $112,000 to $226,000. And that's pretty much a doubling. Well, we're holding a fire academy in the coming year, and that equates to we're estimating about $60,000 of cost just to outfit the guys with their radios and equipment, and so that's where the major increase is coming for equipment. Fire department does have some revenues. I'd like to talk about those now. In the general fund, our revenues we're projecting or recommending is $2,748,757. And the majority of that is from the airport. We get reimbursed for our airport rescue and firefighting. It's our largest source, and it's for us providing emergency services to the airport and for working with their building and fuel handling inspections. Mutual aid at $400,000. Mutual aid is reimbursements from other agencies and jurisdictions in which our firefighters are called to assist in a fire. We get reimbursed for the cost of us sending both our personnel and our equipment out to those other fires. AMR is American Medical Response reimbursement. And as part of AMR's contract with Santa Barbara County's emergency response agencies, we as a city receive a percentage of their revenues. Our fire trucks often respond ahead of their ambulances, and we give basic life support services to the people in need. Fire inspection fees really are derived, there's about 3 main sources of that. One of the sources is engine company inspections. We send our engine companies out to buildings to do fire inspections. Also at 630 Garden Street, we have at the counter, we do building plan checks, plan reviews, and we also issue fire code permits. And the other major source of revenue is this Prop 172 half-cent sales tax. And this was a sales tax that was approved by 58% of the voters in 1992. And it's dedicated. This half cent is dedicated to safety, to public safety, to local public safety, and that's the fire department's share of that half cent sales tax. Oh, and other, well, sometimes we get training reimbursements for trainings we give on. You just have some other revenues that come in. We also, that's about, enough said about that. Okay, so let's look at the revenue trends over the last few years. Again, let's take a look at the current year budget. You can see we were expecting almost $7 million. We're coming in about $200,000 short, $2.5 million. About 94% of revenues are coming in. And all of this is basically the mutual aid category. We only have billed and received $188,000 so far. But but we're compensated as well because we haven't spent that much in overtime and sending personnel equipment out. So losing that revenue, we've also haven't spent the money to send them out. Sales tax, as you've heard from other presentations, has been a strong performer. It's up 9% this year. The fire inspection fees are also up considerably, and it's due to our new inspection program. This is the second year of its implementation, and we've had some major building plan check reviews as well come through. Cottage Hospital is one of note that I think of. The other category represents monies that we receive, revenues received from the on-duty TV show, and also reimbursements from trainings that we've paid for in past fiscal years. So going on to fiscal year, our recommendation for fiscal year 13, we're thinking $2.7 million, very close to the adopted in fiscal year 12.
Mr. White has a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The 1.9 that the airport reimbursement.
Yes.
That's staffed with a 3-person engine company out there.
Yes.
And would that then be a number that we could sort of use as to say that that's what a station costs to fund? I mean, as a basic number, that would hold.
Councilmember White, yeah, that is approximate. That's a little bit more expensive because we have 2 engineers out there, so there'd be some small savings.
Four staff with.
No, it's actually got 3, but 2 of those are engineers because they are driving those
engineers
large.
And a captain.
Yes.
Yes.
I see.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, talking about the ARF program, we do see a $32,000 request for increase. Actually, this amount is basically the increase to salaries. I get this number from the finance department. It's a 1.8% increase. And if you have any questions about it, we can go into that too. But we're recommending that. Mutual aid, we're keeping at $400,000. We're always expecting a busy fire season, but we hear more word that at least that number should be achieved. 3 years ago, we had a $2 million mutual aid number, so we're much reduced from where it's been in the past.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yes, for the residents of the state. Fire inspection fees, we're expecting 195, almost 196,000, and because we're achieving those kinds of results, we're thinking that that's a solid number. So going on to the Wildland Fire Suppression Assessment Fund. Chief DeMizio mentioned that the assessment fund, there's multiple wildland interfaces that have been identified in the city footprint. But the assessment fund is derived and benefits only the properties in the foothill and the extreme foothill zones, this area and this area. The fund's 3 main areas of focus are defensible space, vegetation management, and road clearance. This year's appropriation request is $289,879. Most of this is comprised of special projects, and that's contracted work to remove the vegetation, to provide defensible space, and to clear the roads. It supports one full-time equivalent, one employee position. Allocated costs are, again, for vehicle maintenance and replacement, information systems, insurance, and overhead. The materials request is for small tools, equipment repair, vehicle fuel, and office supplies. And we've budgeted some equipment for weed whackers and other vegetation management tools. We can look at these appropriations over the trend over the last few years. Again, we'll look at fiscal year 12's, how we're going to wind up, just about on budget, about $4,000 over. The prime reason for this is the special projects category. Now, the thing about the special project, it includes encumbrances, which are for projects that carry over from one fiscal year to another. We start a project in May, and it's going to carry over through June 30th into July. So that includes those purchase orders that are encumbered. But because this fund is so project-driven, that's why they matter here more than in other places you may have seen. All of the other categories for the current fiscal year are falling within tolerable range for variance. Now, the fiscal year recommended budget for 13 is about 24% larger than fiscal year 12. And most of this increase is in the special projects area. And there's been an accumulation over the years, over the last 4 years, of about $7,000 to $10,000 a year that we haven't spent, that's been in reserves, and now we want to appropriate that money and get more projects going to clear the space. If you know salaries and benefits is up a bit, that's again because wage concessions have expired and retirement costs have increased a bit. The revenues for the Wildland Fund, pretty flat for the trend. There's a small increase in fiscal year 13. It's a 2% consumer price index increase. That's a result of that, and also there's been some new properties built in the assessment zone, and so there's new assessments on those new properties.
A question on that.
Yes.
I know the county assessor for homes that were destroyed in either the T or Hazardita fire, they did not have to pay the same level of property tax because there was no home there. And I think then when, am I correct? I think that they did that. And then when there's a new home, then they reassess at that point. Did we do the same thing with this
Correct.
assessment fund? So as we see more homes being built and established, was there a dip, and is it going to go back up as more homes are rebuilt? And do we know what kind of change that was over time, or just curious?
Madam Mayor, I don't have the records on that. I'd have to go back and look at the detail.
But the dip would have
that's
been
what
before
I would
what you saw
expect.
here, right?
That's correct. That's
Yeah.
what I would expect. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. White?
I was under the impression that the benefit assessment district was a parcel tax rather than an assessed valuation tax, but it's a fixed amount per parcel.
It is a fixed amount per parcel, but we did waive that people who are victims of the fire during that time period.
Thank you.
That's what I meant, yeah. But, yeah.
That concludes my speech on this part of the presentation.
Thank you, Ron.
Ms. Murillo had a question, too.
What is your name, sir? I didn't catch it.
Ron Lickety.
Lipke?
Lickety.
Litkey. Mr. Litkey, nice to meet you. You keep talking about special projects. Can you describe what those are? And I'm sorry if you said and I missed it. We had a long night.
Oh, yeah.
Please.
Special projects. Oh, for the Wildland Fund? Well, yes.
Just in general, you've been mentioning them, and I was wondering if you could describe a couple.
Well, I think that Chief would be better at describing those special projects. I can tell you that we contract out with companies to, say, clear the roads back, the brush along the roads. That's a project. Go ahead.
Yeah, it could be any project that's not totally covered by an ongoing type situation that we need to budget for. For instance, with the wildland, I mean, some of those, you've talked about carrying over encumbrances and things. It could be for a biologist to look for bird nesting sites, and we need to carry over those funds. It could be for a specific project area within the wildland. As far as when we get grant monies, we will hold that for neighborhood fuels treatment and focus that funding. So, did I answer your question?
Yes, sir. Another one, please. A few sections back, you talked about a fire academy, and there was a big jump in equipment cost. Will you please describe that a little bit better for me?
I think I can handle that. Councilmember Murillo, yes, what we're trying to do is budget ahead of time for academies. I talked about the kind of ebb and flow of hiring. So we want to project ahead for that we're going to need to hire firefighters on, and a good chunk of that is for their equipment. I think we looked at the average turnout code ensemble is upwards of over $2,000 for every firefighter. You talk about radios; those are close to $1,000. And we can't really reuse used out turnouts, so we have to buy pretty much. As the firefighters go through those academies, we know they're going to beat up their turnouts, so they use used ones, but when they get on the floor, we want them to have a good set of turnouts so that those turnouts, which we know have a lifespan of about 5 years, depending on usage. So we're trying to budget out ahead of all that stuff, and so we don't have to go before council and ask for additional appropriations mid-cycle.
Well, we're always happy to see you. Thank you.
I'm going to follow up and talk about a few of the fire department's key performance objectives. These are our P3 type things. Oops, excuse me. Next slide. Get out of that. Thank you. Here we go. This is for last year. Some of our accomplishments, I guess, I wanted to bring to light. The biggest thing was getting our fire administration office renovation project behind us. This took multiple years, and it was the second phase of our Station 1 project. So that project's been underway since 2005, and it felt really good. And we have some awful nice offices to work out of now. We met our operations response goal of less than 4 minutes for medical emergencies. This was a priority for me that we start looking at if medical emergencies are 70% of what we do. I wanted to make sure that we do this as best as we can. This was one of our key things. And I think that 80% could even be improved on by the use of technology, use of our TV station to broadcast. We have our own in-house TV unit to broadcast training, increased use of internet to train firefighters to keep them within their sub-districts. Our emergency services manager updated the city's emergency operations plan as part of the county's hazardous mitigation plan. That's a big thing because that enables us to submit for disaster recovery grants if we need to. Hopefully we don't. We increased fire code enforcement on properties up in the high fire, extreme high fire areas on defensible space. This was a goal of ours. We wanted to actually put a number to that, and it looks like we're going to hit the 200 enforcement cases this year, and that's with decreased staff. So that's a tribute to the good work, the outreach that they're doing up there in the foothills. We implemented a third radio frequency for tactical use at emergencies. This is almost entirely built out. We have a few pieces of hardware to install, but this gives us the capability for firefighters to talk on tactical radio frequencies so that we can manage multiple tactical events at the same time and still have our dispatch frequency free. One last thing that I want to mention that I didn't list here was the development of a 5-year strategic plan. I'm very proud of this. Worked together with labor to develop a common vision of where we want the fire department to go, and this should be a very good tool for the next 5 years for our fire department. Moving on to our objectives for 2013 upcoming. We were proud recipients of Assistance to Firefighter grant this year for over about $250,000 to pay for the installation of diesel exhaust extraction systems in 7 of our fire stations. We only have the extraction system in our downtown station right now. It's proven that diesel is a carcinogen, so this will directly contribute to the health and safety of our firefighters on a daily basis. We're creating an outdoor industrial storage area program to get inspections of the outdoor industrial storage areas. We want to conduct fire and life safety inspections of those and enter those areas into our records management system. It's something that we had, I wouldn't say it was an oversight, but it's something that was spotty, kind of hit and miss. So we want to go back into these things, make sure that they're all looking good as far as from a fire and life safety basis. We are in the process right now of working on a high fire hazard area mapping and GIS data collection. You might have seen something on the TV last night. We're getting some good coverage on that. We're sending firefighters out into the neighborhoods with GPS units. They're collecting data on entryways, driveways, water sources, bridges, and then they're bringing it back in. We're actually creating a data layer for our firefighters that they can use. They'll be able to access this information through their mobile data computers, and we'll also be able to give this information to incoming units if we have another T-fire, if we have another hazard to fire.
This is too good to pass up here. So if I go out and I'm fighting a fire, I pull this up and I can tell where the gas line is or where the nearest hydrant is, or what else comes through on this?
Councilmember Hotchkiss, it's pretty incredible. We're kind of working towards a tablet-based architecture, if we can, so that you could have an iPad and you could look at this. You can drill down in. You can literally see the outlines of the buildings, the driveways, all the major. We'll know where the high-tension wires are going across the Riviera through Parma Park, all those kind of things, and so it'll give us a lot of information that we can utilize, and we'll also prepackage response into certain areas. So if we have a fire, say in Eucalyptus Hill drainage, we'll know that this is where we want to put the units. We'll know that another layer would be an evacuation routes for the public, so that incoming units would know that this is a way out. We want to use a different way in. So this is something that we've been working on for a long time, and it's just the beginning. It's just the tip of the iceberg, because once we get this in for our high fire hazard area, we want to be working this down across the entire city and going in and actually inputting the information that we have on our records management system. We call it Firehouse. Input that in, and so that we have the downtown corridor, all the information. So that's the future of information management for the fire service. To be honest with you, it's been a challenge because of the losing a direct connection. We used to have an IS person assigned to the fire department on about a 60% basis. That position, because of budget cutbacks, was lost. IS is doing a tremendously great job trying to support us. But to do this, we had to go out and hire an hourly GIS specialist. So that would be something, as a fire chief, I would really like to see, is more support for this kind of thing in the future.
What percent do you think you have already? Is it by parcels or area or what, where you've got this GPS data already?
From what I understand, we've covered about 2/3 of the high fire hazard area already. That's as a result, and this is kind of doing it on a shoestring, training firefighters from engine companies out and having them actually walk the areas and do it by hand.
Is county doing the same thing to complement what we're doing, do you know?
County has something similar, and what we've used county map sets. We're trying to kind of cross architecture with the county and Montecito, so we want it to be a standardized, not a city-specific type layer. The challenge for us now is to get it accessible to us on our mobile data terminals through PD's CAD system. We've kind of had to do some workarounds with PDFs, but this is going to happen because we're finally able to get enough bandwidth So we're able to work around some of their security issues, which are very important to law enforcement, that aren't as critical to fire, for instance. And so this is happening. It's exciting.
Are we sharing with counties so we can have the same software and limit our costs, therefore?
We're actually using the same individual that works for County Fire. He's an hourly for County Fire, and we're actually using him on an hourly basis also. So yes, he's real intimate in what they're doing on the County Fire.
And we got the same software?
It's pretty standard. It's Esri. It's ArcGIS, so it's a standard software that
you.
everybody uses just about. Let's see. So, and then I mentioned, I think I also went into implementing the upgrades to our mobile data computers. That's going to give us access to the internet and to all this other information. And Ron touched on this, and we mentioned it. We're going to be conducting a recruitment for firefighters to maintain full staffing levels within the next year, and that's always a big push. We're going through a huge succession planning and work effort. Right now we're in the process of conducting a fire captain's promotional. Right after that, we'll conduct a promotional for fire engineers. And once we move those people up, then we need to bring some new firefighters on to fill in behind them. That's it for me. I just want to say how proud I am to provide leadership and direction for the men and women of Santa Barbara City Fire Department. They've accomplished so much in the last few years. I think our budget presentation showed that we're an organization that's heavily driven by people, but we're for people. We're here to protect and serve, and I want to thank Mayor and Council and also the City Administrator's Office for helping us do so in our mission.
Well, thank you for your work and your department's work each and every day. Mr. Hotchkiss, I know, has a series of questions for you.
I got a few questions that are quite narrow and then some broader ones. Insofar as enforcement in the wildland suppression district, one in the wildland fund or whatever that area is, what do? We send a letter to say, hey, you got to cut back your trees, or how do we do this?
It does begin with our code, which says that everybody has to have at least 100-foot enforceable, defensible space area around that. We send out notices at the beginning of the year. We have let's see if I have it with me. We have a flyer that we send out to everybody in the high fire hazard area, reminding them of our code issues. And then in the past, we only really responded to neighborhood complaints. But we found that there's a need to start an enforcement program to try and apply this more evenly. So that resulted in us choosing 200 as a goal for enforcement cases. Our folks in the wildland fire area get out and actually will do defensible space inspections. If they find a violation, they'll give them notice. They have time to complete that. If they don't do that within the time period, then it goes to the city attorney's office for follow-up and citation.
Do we ever just do the work and bill them?
That can be done, but that's not how we're handling it right now.
Okay. Another question was, you mentioned diesel. Our trucks are diesel?
All of our vehicles are diesel. They're powered by a biodiesel mix.
And they will be in the future also?
At this time, they are. I've looked at using compressed natural gas fire trucks. There are some out there. The drawbacks, the good thing about that is that they're very clean running. The drawbacks are if that fire truck goes to Northern California, do they have compressed natural gas refueling capabilities? So we'd have to look at ways that fire truck would be used in town where we have refueling. But right now, it's all diesel for the heavy equipment.
Excuse me. In the notes that you sent us before, it said one of the goals is to, contain 90% of all structure fires to area or room of origin. Is that actually possible? I mean, how do you do that? You have no control over this.
Well, it's an aggressive goal, and what that requires is for us to have early reporting of the fire and to get to that fire very quickly. So those are two separate things. If we get the early reporting and we have the coverage, then we should be able to, and we do meet that goal frequently. We don't meet it all the time, but it gives us something to shoot for. a target to reduce fire loss, especially in residences.
What's our baseline right now, would you say? Do we know? Have any idea?
I don't have that number offhand, but it's in the high, I would say it's in the high percentage. We do hit it on many occasions, so I'm going to say it's probably 80+%.
You mentioned fire academies and recruiting new people. What are we looking forward to this next year for replacement of firefighters? Numbers.
At this time, I work closely with the association, and I'm talking to people all the time. I'm trying to kind of get a sense of how many people it looks like. I'm anticipating an academy of 4 to 6.
4 to 6.
It's
okay.
not really cost effective to do it below 4, so 6 is a good number.
And you have a backlog. You can just go back and call up, still see if they're still available?
We run a list. We had a joint list, but that list has expired and it hasn't been renewed by the other fire agencies in Santa Barbara County. So we're fortunate right about this time because there's a lot of really good firefighters out there who need jobs. So we've been able to get lateral firefighters to come over. That needs to be balanced, I think, with making sure that we have people who are connected to the community. So my intent as a fire chief was to try and alternate a lateral type fire hire with an open recruitment so we can get people from our community.
And now for a broader question that I had called you about. Since the Hazel Zeta fire, we've obviously you've done a lot to remove what would you call fuel, I guess. What other things have we done so that, and what did we learn from that fire that we could do better? Because one of these days we're going to have something like that again, unfortunately.
Well, some of the other things we've done on top of the vegetation management, the fuel reduction that we've done, are that the T fire was, and this was something that was kind of an eye-opener for a lot of people in the fire industry, was a ember-driven fire. So that if you were on Westmont Circle, for instance, there were showers of embers coming down. That took us a little bit by surprise because a lot of the engineering that goes into home construction hadn't really addressed that issue at that time. Since the T fire, a lot of engineering has gone into stopping embers from entering attic areas. Even as small as a 1/4 inch opening on your screen at a vent would allow these embers to get into your attic, and with the amount of wind, caused a lot of fires. So engineering is one thing. I mentioned the evacuation pre-planning that we had in place was very effective on the T fire, and I think that's a tribute to the pre-planning efforts that were done. So that's another area. The ongoing chipping efforts are big because it's a public education issue. So the public is much more informed now as a result, unfortunately, as a result of the 2 actual incidents that we've gone through. So there's a much greater awareness here in Santa Barbara City than there are in many, many communities that have wildland-urban interfaces. And this is a big thing in terms of getting cooperation from the public. So our public cooperates really well and supports the fire department life safety initiative is in the foothill. And on an operational standpoint, we decided to, instead of getting another large, they call them Type 1 fire engine pumpers, we decided to put off on ordering one of those and order a Type 3 engine. Those are the much smaller wildland urban interface engines, and that just went to purchasing, I think, this week. So we're going to purchase a second Type 3 engine, which is suitable for working in the urban interface area. And so a lot of those things are all contributing to enhanced life safety in the foothills.
Now, a really awful subject to bring up, but what if we have a major air disaster either around Cottage Hospital or out at the airport? How are you prepared? How are we going to react? What do we do?
Well, they're kind of two separate things. I mean, we're in good shape at the airport. The airport, as you see, it's an expensive operation that we run at the airport, but it provides high levels of response for the airport. We have really specific training requirements at the airport. So, and all the equipment is based there. They have to meet a 3-minute response time objective, which they do regularly. So the airport is kind of a separate issue from.
Well, if it was something major, we'd have to rush an awful lot of more people out there.
And that's what we do. We integrate extremely well. We do drills the first off is we have automatic aid through Santa Barbara County. So we have this different kind of alerts for different kind of emergencies at the airport. The county responds in first. We also respond city assets, which include our heavy rescue truck, our special response unit, which is capable of mass triage for up to 100 people. Chiefs are out there. So we have a real scaled-up response to the airport. That's part of the fire emergency plan at the airport, which we're actively working on right now to update. That hasn't been updated in a lot of time. And that's the kind of things that the airport gets from hiring the fire department. That we will do that kind of stuff for them. So we're updating the emergency response plan at the airport right now. Now downtown, you're referring to air emergencies.
Out of Cottage.
Cottage Hospital, the helicopters at Cottage Hospital. It's like any kind of life safety thing. There's some.
And the reason I bring this up is that there's been local concern about the helicopter there, so I'm hoping to be able to reassure people.
Certainly, Councilmember Hotchkiss, Mayor Schneider. It's like almost every life safety thing that there's trade-offs. As a fire chief, I look at the trade-off. All those life flights should be for life and to save a life. So if that's the case, and every one of those flights is to save a life, then I look at what the alternatives were. And in the past, we used to have to send one of our engine companies, Engine 5, over to La Cumbre School to land a helicopter at La Cumbre School. Or else the alternative to that was to land it out at our airport, and then you have that 15-minute plus drive into town. So those are minutes that count for life safety. So if the helicopter is landing at La Cumbre, then I'm a little concerned about safety to our community because it's landing not at a designated helispot. It could be any time of day. The children could be playing there. I used to work on a helicopter crew with the Forest Service, so I'm very familiar with helicopter safety. You have angles, the landing angles of entry and departure are critical with helicopters, and you're flying in an area where you're over homes at La Cumbre. Now, flying into the helispot at Cottage Hospital, in terms of looking at what they have there for preparedness, well, I would have preferred that they had an automatic fire sprinkler or a foam system on the rooftop itself. What they do now have is foam hand lines that we have to get up to the top area if there is some kind of emergency on the rooftop. But at the same time, like I said, it's a trade-off, and as a fire chief, I'd rather have them landing at a designated helispot where it's up in the air and they have a clear flight line rather than over homes landing at a school.
Thank you very much.
If you haven't been to a drill at the airport, I think they use an MTD bus as the fuselage of a plane, and actors are there, and some are, the triage, and they come in. It's actually quite astonishing to watch. It's a great drill. So I don't know when the next one is, but maybe you might want to watch it. It's pretty spectacular. Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The last year we had, was it 10 or 11 retirements, something to that effect? What was the number last year?
Councilmember White, we had, I believe, about 12 people retire.
12, and then this year you're anticipating, you're just putting 4 out there as your educated guess as you.
That's correct. Right now we'll have 4 openings right now that I could see. Yeah.
And then last year, or in the process in this area, the various fire agencies get together to put on an academy, or how does the academy process work for the local departments? Because obviously this is the bigger. Besides, I guess there's counties bigger than city, then the others are even smaller. There must be some kind of collaboration going on there on that issue.
We're very fortunate to have a fire training facility, our tower facility on South Garden Street. We're the only fire agency in Santa Barbara County that currently has that. So we have done collaborative academies with just about every agency except for Santa Maria to the north. Our last academy, we did that along with Montecito Fire. Typically, there's issues with different ways of doing it. You know, this is the Santa Barbara way, this is the Santa Barbara County way. But there's nothing that we can work around that, and we have done that in the past.
And so but I mean, for example, you have this bit of an academy, a small number of folks that you're looking to hire soon. Would other agencies also be looking to join in, or would this simply be Santa Barbara City Fire training that small group?
Every time we do one of these academies, we kind of reach out, and because we want to join in. We want the more the merrier. We can share staff. A lot of the responsibilities, it makes it much easier to train them all. They all have some physical training time, and if we can use the county's drill captain to do that, yeah, that's great. It actually saves us labor costs.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Mr. House.
Thanks, Chief DeMazio. Just a couple of things here. When we look into Mission Canyon area there, you know, there's a line on the map where it's the county on one side and the city on the other. And, of course, then on the other side of that same territory, we've got Montecito Fire Department and our relationship with them. How does that work when you're called on there's a response in that area where you both almost share? I mean, it's very close. I mean, do we rely on county to respond to some of those situations, or do we respond for them? Same thing with Montecito. How does that work?
Councilmember House, Madam Mayor, yes, we have automatic aid agreements, and at the beginning of just about annually, we review these. In fact, Chief McElroy is working on the agreement that we have with Montecito, and I think his next step will be to work with, we worked on the agreement that we have with the Forest Service, and the next step will be to work with the county. And so, yeah, we automatically send equipment to them and vice versa. And it's broken out geographically into different subsets.
It doesn't require like a higher level decision or something. It's automatically already worked out.
Automatic is correctly. It's all through pre-planning efforts.
And then in the Canal Road area where the slide is and how difficult those roads are up there, do you have currently adequate equipment to get up into those areas? Are you going to need to get something more that's special to be able to navigate those difficult roads that are falling apart?
Councilmember House, I mentioned that Type 3 engine. That's a four-wheel drive engine with a very short wheelbase, and it can really climb hills. So we keep an eye on that Caneo Road, Caneo Lane area very closely. There was a time when we couldn't get our larger fire engines in, and so we had to develop pre-plans, keep an eye on that, and communicate those plans to our neighbors. So I think we had Montecito Fire come in actually and look at that. There might be a time period where they're doing construction to that corner coming up here recently, and we're thinking ahead to that time. Operations Chief McElroy even thought about maybe we'll place one of our reserve engines into that street ahead of time, work with the neighborhood, and so we'd have an engine actually on that street if we can't get in. So
during high fire times or something?
That's correct. Yeah, it's all looking ahead and trying to plan for the eventualities.
Now, do we have any areas in town where the water supply is really weak, where you would have a difficult time if you were even Johnny-on-the-spot responding, but there wouldn't necessarily be really good supply of water? I'm thinking about in terms of our capital program we did some major improvements, didn't we, up in the foothills there at some point with Montecito?
Yeah, we have some hydropneumatic areas that require pump lift stations. Those are probably most susceptible to problems if there was earthquakes. I'm always concerned about emergency generators working, making sure that those are maintained. But by and large, our water system is incredibly robust here in Santa Barbara. We're fortunate to have that gravity feed off of Lake Cachuma here, and even at Caneo Lane, you might think that's not a strong hydrant. That's a very, very strong hydrant, almost as strong as the hydrants downtown,
wow.
Capable of flowing over 1,000 gallons per minute.
Okay, lastly, you didn't mention any new or major capital needs in the coming year. I don't know if that's really the topic here, but it's something we should be thinking about. Are you going to be replacing major pieces of equipment, or do you plan ahead then for that and have a sinking fund? Or maybe I missed that in your presentation.
Our equipment is through, we have a vehicle replacement fund, and so we pay into that regularly. and over a period of about, what's our rotation, to about 10 years for frontline engines, we budget for and then replace those engines. They go to a reserve status, and after about 15 to 20 years, those go off to auction, so that's all pre-budgeted for. Capital needs for the fire department in general, our Station 7 is probably the station that needs the most attention, and we've been able to make that work pretty well. But in terms of lifespan, I'd like to see that kind of remodeled at the very least, similar to what Station 6 got put in place. Our tower facility needs upgrades. The training tower itself gets a lot of use, and so wear and tear on that is starting to take.
Those are on our capital improvement program?
And you'll
list?
see those are listed, yes. Not
Okay.
funded for, but listed.
Okay, good. Oh, by the way, how's the Cacique Undercrossing working for Station 2? It's Station 2 over there, right? The Cacique Undercrossing?
Oh, that's, the guys love it.
I mean, it just seems like the response time for the Lower East Side there would just be enhanced tremendously.
That's correct. They're able to drop into that Lower East Side very quickly by going underneath there. So that's been very effective. That's my only area of response times that I'm concerned about is into the Coast Village Road area from Station 2. But they can get into that Lower East Side much better by not having to go through the roundabout up into Carpinteria.
Right.
So that's good.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay. Move on to the other chief, Chief Sanchez in the Police Department.
Hi. How are you?
We're here. I
Good.
feel like I was just here. I was just,
You were. We
I know-
were.
We were.
We were.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. I've got my command staff here with me. We'll all be participating a little bit. I also brought Sergeant Ed Olson to share some really great highlights later in the presentation. So we'll go ahead and move on with our slides here and I'll try to be brief. We're going to do a department overview. Ed is then going to come and talk about restorative policing and some of the successes that have gone on there and continue. Frank will talk about expenditures and revenues, also our police staffing paradigm that we've gone through before with you, with a couple of little additions to it, and then we're going to have the rest of the command staff talk to their P3 and divisional highlights, and then we'll take some questions. On the police department, we have 203 total permanent staff. We have 13 managers, 190 employees and supervisors. We also have 15 to 20 hourly employees, which average about 18,000 hours, a little more than that a year in work for us. It's a little difficult to see. That is our organizational chart. There are a couple of changes I wanted to bring to your attention. Over the years, if you look up on top next to the deputy chief, it says Professional Standards Unit. That used to be called Internal Affairs. Most modern police departments are taking those words, Internal Affairs, out of their repertoire and adding Professional Standards Unit, which is really what it is in terms of how we do business, in terms of discipline, training, and so on. The other change that you'll notice is that the dispatch center is now under administrative services and not under patrol, so it's under Captain Torres, and that's where we believe it's the best way to have it for several reasons. One being the training, which Gil has, and also the recruitment. Gil has hiring, and we decided to put all the hiring of sworn and non-sworn personnel under the same roof. But other than that, the org chart has not changed over the last year or two, except for those two minor changes. Obviously, the admin services, I won't go over every box up there. handles all the admin services, training, dispatch, records, animal control, our volunteers, etc. Investigative Division is currently Captain Alex Altavilla. The captains recently rotated to different divisions, and Alex is there in our Investigative Bureau. And then our patrol captain, currently on the books, is still Captain Martell, but his last day is May 18th. And on May 18th, Lieutenant Dave Whittam will become Captain Dave Whittam, and he's with us here today. And he has the brunt of the sworn staffing. I have an executive assistant, Barbara Sansone. Our community and media relations team is fairly new. It has changed from the last organizational chart. At that time, we had our PIO, Lorenzo Duarte, and we had one beat coordinator for the entire city, who was Adrian Gutierrez. We have upped that. We have one sergeant, who is now Riley Harwood, and we have the beat coordinators as well as Pal. In Frank's office, the deputy chief, he has the business office. He is in the process of doing the interviews, and I think Councilman Hotchkiss asked me in my presentation last when we were going to get our business manager, and that's right around the corner. So in the next week or two, the deputy chief will be doing the interviews for that, and hopefully in the next 3 weeks to 4 weeks, we'll know who that person is going to be, and we'll start off the fiscal year with a new business manager. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. In our investigative bureau, which is Captain Altavilla, we're very busy there. We have one sergeant and 6 detectives working the persons section, handling homicides and crimes against persons. And we have Mike Goulamars, our lab tech. Our property section is Sergeant Dan McGrew, handling the burglaries and all those things that are currently giving us some pretty huge challenges, but they're doing a great job in making many arrests. Our narcotics section is one sergeant and 5 detectives. That includes our detective that is in the SaberNet task force. And then our youth services section, which is Sergeant Rivas, has 4 detectives. These are detectives and a sergeant who deal with all of our youth services, our missing children, but also the schools. Since we do not have a school resource officer, they are playing the part of school resource officers before, during, and after school, in the middle of all the other things that they do. In the fall, we will have a school resource officer full-time back in the schools, and I've already talked to Dr. Cash about that, and he's very happy with us in that regard. In our information technology group, we have Captain Torres is over that group. We have one manager and 4 specialists. Those are all civilians. Our training and recruitment, we have one sergeant and one training coordinator. The one sergeant currently is Sergeant Marizita, who will be a lieutenant on May 18th. Sergeant Todd Stoney will be moving over from professional standards to that position. And we have one training coordinator. Again, last year we talked about civilianizing that position and putting that officer in a police car. It's exactly what we did. And Sadie Lumen is doing an outstanding job for us in that position. We have a range master who's civilian and one property officer, obviously civilian. In our communications center, we have one lieutenant, 4 supervisors, and 14 dispatchers. Lieutenant Molina is currently in there. Lieutenant Molina was out on long-term injury, but we brought him back to work in the dispatch center as a full-time lieutenant. In our records bureau, we have one lieutenant, 2 supervisors, civilians, 13 record specialists, and 1 station officer and 1 office specialist. In our special events section, we have 1 sergeant, that's Sergeant Mary Linda Arroyo. She's doing a great job. We have 1 special events coordinator, another position that the last time we spoke was a sworn officer who is now in a police car, and we put a civilian in this position, and that's Annalisa Hoods, and she's doing a great job. Again, salary savings, and we put 2 more cops on patrol teams. We have our 3 animal control officers and our 1 permit specialist working there under the special events section supervisor. We get to patrol, the largest division in the department. We have our 3 lieutenants, watch commanders, 8 sergeants, and 61 team officers. Our traffic section is 1 sergeant and 6 officers on motors. Our tactical patrol force, 1 sergeant and 5 officers. The sergeant is here with us today. That's Ed Olson. They are handling citywide our issues with our homeless, mentally ill, our issues on Milpas Corridor, the beaches, the parks, and also certainly the State Street Corridor, along with Officer Butel, who's one of the beat coordinators handling the Milpas Corridor. Our gang suppression team, there's kind of it's sort of correct and incorrect. It says 1 sergeant and 4 officers, and a few months ago, we were at a meeting, and all the chiefs got up and said how many sergeants and how many officers they had working gangs, and they all got up and said, I have 1 sergeant and 3 officers, 1 sergeant and 6 officers, and I got up and I said, I have 1 sergeant and 140 officers working gangs. They all wish they would have said that. Literally, all of our patrol officers are not just answering calls for service, they're also paying attention to a lot of the gang issues citywide. We have 2 canine officers. Both of our canine officers work very hard, long hours. Both of our dogs. We used to have a bomb dog. We do no longer have one. A couple years ago, we decided we didn't need one. And both of these great canines work now. They're not only search dogs, but they're also narcotic trained dogs. We have 1 drink and driver team, 1 officer. That's been the case for quite a while now. And another great resource for us and a source of revenue for us is our park and enforcement team, which we always try to keep fully staffed. And we have 1 sergeant, that's Sergeant Juanita Smith, and 12 park and enforcement officers. Currently, we have only 1 of those PEOs off on long-term injury. Our SWAT team and our crisis negotiation response team, those are collateral duties. One of you asked me the other day if these people are assigned full-time. In cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, they have full-time SWAT teams. That's all they do. Here, it's a collateral duty. We have some detectives and some patrol officers that are assigned to SWAT. They train often, not as often as they'd like, I'm sure, but they do a wonderful job here. So when we have a SWAT call-out, which is a very serious matter, these are folks that leave their other jobs to work on this collateral duty, and that goes hand in hand with CNRT. A little far for you to see. These are calls for service response times for Part 1 crimes. Right as we look at that arrow going up and down, it does fluctuate, but in the last month or 2, we've been around at 6 minutes, which is pretty outstanding response time, and we continue to work on that. Again, it really sometimes depends on what types of calls we're on that night, or for a whole week we may be so inundated with calls that may go up. But we are, as of end of April, at about a 6-minute response time, which is pretty outstanding. I'm sorry.
Just one question on that. On the previous slide there, it looks like it's in the tens on the left-hand side, like it's 60 minutes or something like that. There is? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Great. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd be really worried if it was 60.
Little
yeah.
Fuzzy.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm a little fuzzy.
No. The screen is fuzzy is what it is. We'll blame the screen. In terms of crime trends, over the last month, we have certainly had about 100% increase. We've had quite a few assaults, and we've had several robberies and some felony assaults at that. But in the last couple of weeks, we've made some arrests on those crimes. But nevertheless, in the month of April, it did go up about 100%, which is quite a bit. But many arrests were made. So crime solved, but the crimes did occur. So it did go up in the last month.
Chief, one quick
Yes, question.
on the peak in those assault crimes and the arrests made. So, are you saying that those crimes were related, or by and large, or no?
No, we had several, 2 or 3 robberies that went on last month. We had several, and maybe Ed will talk to it, but several assaults, homeless person on homeless person in the park, where we've made arrests, but the crime did occur, so it shows up there. and we've had some other domestic violence issues in April that spiked it up. So none of them are related, but we just had a flurry of them, and you just never know. But April was not a good month for that, with a 100% increase. But in the majority of these cases, probably over 90%, there were arrests made already. But they did occur.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'm going to turn it over for a little bit to Sergeant Ed Olson's doing a fabulous job with restorative policing. It continues to be very successful, and under the leadership of Ed and his great team, good things are happening. So Ed's going to take a couple of slides and talk to you about what's going on in the street and in our parks and beach areas. Laser? I think the fire chief took the laser. Please remove that from his budget, please.
Excellent.
And
Now, we're high-tech here.
That's why the fire chief wanted to be first, so he can take it with him.
Madam Mayor, council members, I just wanted to talk about a couple of the people up here that are photographed. You're looking at some people that have been some of our most chronic offenders. I've been part of the Tactical Patrol Force and the Restorative Police Unit now for 2 years. And so when I speak to the successes we've had, it's in that time that we've really had a lot of change to what we've been doing, and certainly last year in July when you helped augment our program. So that's what we're here talking about today. This gentleman here represented the most prolific violator in the city of Santa Barbara. He was a resident here for many, many, many years, responsible for hundreds of arrests, many trips to Cottage Hospital, bookings. The amount of money that he costs the taxpayers is insurmountable. I'm sure you're all familiar with the short story, $1 Million Murray. He would be our $1 Million Murray. He has not been on the streets of Santa Barbara since July 7th of last year. This gentleman here lived in Alameda Park West for many, many years. Actually was a certified physician. Interesting story with him, but found himself living on the streets of our city for many, many years. Also prolific violator of alcohol-related offenses, illegal camping, illegal lodging, nuisance-related calls in the downtown corridor. Now happily living at the Falding Hotel. This gentleman was an icon in the downtown corridor. His street name was Indian Joe. He'd been living there for years and years and years. Constantly out there with his sign, dealing with a host of problems. Interesting case here that I really think punctuates our new program, our new enhanced program. By being omnipresent on the street and working with these people, whether it be in the civilian liaison group or with the outreach workers, we visit this gentleman and find out that he's on the verge of reoffending. He was living at the Falding, but he was dealing with some severe back pain and was ready to start turning back to the bottle to deal with the pain he was suffering. Well, we started figuring out that what would be simple for you and me is he was sleeping on a bed. Unfortunately, it was the bed that was causing him the back pain. We removed his bed. We gave him some cardboard to sleep on. He was accustomed to sleeping on the sidewalks. It solved his back problem. He has decided not to turn back to the bottle, and he still remains sober. Has since been reunited with his daughter that he's been estranged from for well over 20 years, and he's about to get married. Just huge success stories.
No.
In terms of restorative policing, this is for the last 6 months. This starts our first month where I started capturing statistics of the newly enhanced restorative police program started in November of 2011. So the stats that you see here are from that date through the end of April. My enforcement officers made 921 misdemeanor citations, 52 felony arrests, and 102 misdemeanor arrests. The restorative police officers, this is specifically officers Hove and Burley, are responsible for the following stats here. 2,334 follow-up visits in 6 months. A follow-up visit can last anywhere from a matter of a couple of minutes to several hours. This is when they're actually meeting with clients that they've worked with over a period of time to get them in some long-term sustained assistance. New placements. This is when we place somebody either in a sober living facility or some treatment facility to get them into the next step of their sober living. Calls for service intervention. This is when an officer out in the field is dealing with somebody that we are well aware of that is dealing with some form of mania or alcoholism, drug dependency, and they know that we might have some unique tools to be able to help them. So they've called our officers or Officer Keld and Burley to the scene. So we helped out 194 times in the last 6 months. Reunifications, this is the one number that we're really happy about, but the one that we have the least control over. We can never force somebody to reunify with their family. We can't force a family to take somebody back that's been living on the street. They became homeless for some reason, but when we are able to reunify somebody with their family, this is a huge success for us, because we're seeing that beginning of that long-term success to get people reunified with their family or friends. Related meetings.
Excuse me, those are 15 separate individuals?
15 separate individuals. Related meetings, again, this could be a phone call, it could be restorative court, it could be anything that is specifically related to people that we're working with, trying to get them into some long-term sober living environment. So in 6 months, they attended 1,200 meetings. Special projects. This is our key number. Our P3 goal says that at any given time, our restorative police officers must maintain a special project list of at least 10 candidates. Special project is somebody that we've wrapped our arms around that we're trying to help get into some state of assistance. In 6 months, we helped 1,400 people. That's astounding. When I took over the program in June of 2010, I ran some stats. For the end of fiscal year 11, quarter 1, we had 32 special projects. At the end of last month, for quarter 3, for fiscal year 12, we had 730. We couldn't do that unless we didn't benefit from the enhancement that you allowed the department to undertake.
Can you the 79, the new placements, so is it accurate to say there were 6 months ago those 79 people were on the street somewhere and now they're not?
Correct. I would have to say, though, I would have to clarify that sometimes we have successes that reoffend, fall out of a program,
Right.
we wrap them up, and then get them back into another placement. So there could be some duplication here. But this is a good number to rally around, because the more times that we get people involved in a sober living facility, remember that for many of these people, it's the first time that they've lived this type of lifestyle in 15, 20 years. It's that much easier to get them back into a program, because now they're seeking it out from us. When I started 2 years ago, when we'd approach people on the street, it was very difficult. They put their hands up, I don't want your help. Once they started seeing what we could do for them, now they seek us out. And when they fall out of a program, the only place they have to go is back to the street, so they come to us now.
That's astonishing. Ms. Maria, you had a question also?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sergeant Olson, so would you know if those 79 placements were having impacts on the Casa Esperanza? Or do sometimes a street person like that other fellow that you mentioned, they live in Alameda Park and maybe they don't get down to the shelter area?
The people that I was mentioning at the beginning of the program here, they rarely benefited from Casa Esperanza. They had no interest in traveling to Casa. They didn't participate in their day center, nor did they utilize any of their bed spaces. That's not to say that some of these people certainly do benefit from Casa Esperanza, represented in the 79 there.
We have a question for Mr. Hotchkiss and then Mr. Francisco.
The 1486 at the bottom, those are also separate individuals, or could those be duplicates?
That could be also duplicates as well, but that's still an astounding number, given the fact that, let's say, the gentleman that's been gone since July 7th of last year, if he's been gone for a year, that's a year where our community didn't have to pay for trips to the hospital, incarceration, taking up bed space at the jail. If he was to come back, we'd put our arms around him and make him a project again. So there are some duplications in there. It's very hard to weed out those people that reoffend.
And your guess is that's 50%?
No, it would be hard to put a percentage on it, because for instance, many of the people that fall out of placement do so almost immediately, and then we get them back into some other program. So at that point, we're still considering them one project. Follow me?
Yeah.
But if they were gone for 6 months and then were to come back, we would have to kind of begin anew.
I understand. Thank you.
Mr. Francisco?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sergeant, so you're giving us these summary numbers here, but I assume that you are actually keeping track of cases, almost like a caseworker. Is that accurate?
Yes, to some degree, but due to HIPAA, we only keep certain stats available for us. Working with Restorative Court, however, they have a little bit more latitude, and since we do have access to court documents, there is a very structured caseload of each of these individuals.
Well, one thing I'm wondering about is if you have enough specific information to say, instead of just that 1486 or the 2334, to say our restorative officers worked with 292 individuals over a period of whatever, and something about results as well. You know, how many of them actually got off the street, that sort of thing.
Sure, I understand what you're getting at. I have 2 enforcement officers whose caseload in the last 6 months has been roughly 1,500 people they've touched. The more that I ask them to document what each person is doing, we begin managing a program to manage a program.
Okay.
It is definitely the next iteration of our program that we want to work towards, for sure. But since July, we've been running as hard and as fast as we can with the new enhancements provided by council.
Okay, thank you very much.
At one point, it was considered important to establish a database. Are we doing that? Do we have the ability to do that?
I know that 2 of the largest social advocacy groups, Bring Our Community Home and Common Ground, were going to combine locally, and that was one of the main issues that they wanted to do, was complete some sort of a database. But that would be something that we would work collaboratively with them, but we wouldn't control it.
You have interactions with the county as well. And
Yes.
Yeah, that is a project that's ongoing. Mr. House and then Mr. Rouse.
Thanks for your report today. It's really interesting and great policing. Question about, and you may not have that much of an interaction with them, but the new people that are in the New Beginnings program with the RVs, do you interact with them very much? And then for those who are not in their program and on the streets, what's your interaction?
When I started 2 years ago, we had a lot more interaction than we do now. The New Beginnings program runs pretty well and is, for the most part, up until recently, very self-policing. I see that there's a lot of push now with some new concern with RV ordinances that have caused some concern. But in the last 18 months, I've not had much contact with them because the program itself runs very well.
What about with those who are not in the program? And I mean, do you deal with the RVs on the streets that are just maybe they stay in a neighborhood too long or they become a nuisance?
When complaint-driven, yes. But the main focus of our push, if you will, are those people that are actually living out on the streets.
Got it. Now, if we see somebody who's, I mean, I just like we recognize these folks you've got up there, there's people that we recognize around, and in some cases maybe we've established some relationship with them. In other cases, we just don't. They're kind of in their own world. Is there a way to initiate contact, or do we just kind of leave people like that alone until they themselves become a problem or reach out for help? I mean, what?
Well, this is where
sometimes they're in pretty bad shape too. You see them, just huddled up and in the rain or something.
The one part of the program that we haven't talked about yet is the community service liaisons. They're extra eyes and ears for us, and they're actually seeing these people and bringing them to our attention and allowing us to contact them and find out how we can assist them immediately and find out how best to direct them through our local services.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, well, Sergeant Knowles, this clearly is an extremely valuable program for our community, and I think you guys are doing amazing work. We spoke about databases, and I know that I've done some work with Common Ground and some of the concepts that we're talking about regionally. But as I look forward to the big picture plan, our resources, our ability to either enhance, develop resources, or to contain resources, do you either track or have even anecdotal information about people that are here that you deal with? Are they here? Did they come to Santa Barbara in need of these services? Were they in Santa Barbara and became needy of these services? And is that something you're even able to track?
The majority of the people that we deal with have anchors here. There's a reason why they're here. What brought them here, I couldn't tell you, but they've been here for a while. I would consider them members of our community. Whether it be 2 years or 25 years, they've been here for a while. We can show that through our police contacts with them. I think I understand what you're getting at. We do have a group of travelers that come through the city. These are people that do not want services. These are people that quite often come from affluent homes that are not actually homeless. They just choose to live on the streets for a period of time and then move along. We contact them. They're the focus of my enforcement group, but we get very little benefit with our restorative policing in terms of interaction with that group of people.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And that's actually what we hear a lot about up here. Is we hear about the young and the restless and the urban vagabonds. So as opposed to the truly service needy.
Correct.
Well, unfortunately, these other people take up resources that could otherwise be spent on people that we need to have you people focus on. Which once again, I think is an amazing amount of police work. So thank you.
Thank you.
You had another slide, I think, too, right? Yeah. Or was that it?
Yeah, one more. This is our restorative outreach specialists and our community service liaisons. The restorative outreach specialists are those that work in the blue shirts. They work very closely with Officers Burley and Hove. Since we've implemented the new enhanced restorative policing program, they've worked just over 1,000 hours. Of those 1,000 hours, 204 were spent on administrative time. This is where they come into the office and get me information regarding people that need services. They've made 878 contacts. They've attended 583 meetings. Some of these meetings can last several minutes. Some of them can be quite lengthy as they're trying to get people through Social Security, trying to get them Social Security benefits, trying to get them a bed, trying to get them hooked up with a sober living facility either here or abroad. So they've been very helpful. Community service liaisons, these are the people in the yellow shirts. These are people that are working in 3 major areas in the city: downtown corridor, beachfront, and the Milpas Street corridor. They've worked close to 2,000 hours, and they've spent 165 hours administrative time. They're bringing me problems that they're hearing from the private residences and the business owners in the areas that they frequent. They've attended 135 meetings. A lot of these are task force or neighborhood improvement meetings. Sometimes they're meetings that just a group of people on one particular block want to have with the liaisons. The key here, though, is in the last 6 months, they've made 8,000 contacts with business owners. That's not 8,000 separate businesses. Every day they work, they can walk into the same business time and time again. Every time they walk into a business, they make a contact. 8,000 businesses have been contacted by our liaisons, and I'm hearing rave reviews from them that they're out there hearing what's going on, and we're getting really good results from that information.
I would echo, I've only heard amazing stories and results about the restorative policing program, except to say people wish there was more of it, which is our issue up here we'll have to grapple with at some point. Couple of things, and actually some of that praise is coming from social service agencies who frankly were a little hesitant when the recruitment was going on with the outreach workers and reporting to the police department as opposed to reporting to a social service agency. And there were some, unknown questions, but I think I've just heard all but good news. Everything's been good news. So congratulations for that. One issue, and I don't know if it's a community service liaison or a homeless outreach specialist or just within your division for sure. I get, and I think we all get emails, especially again around the lower Milpas area, and especially at this time of the year, it seems to be a pattern where the winter shelter closes and Casa Esperanza is down to the 70 and 30 beds, so the 100 beds. And what potential, if any, impacts there are with those actual individuals versus other individuals who may not be using the services of Casa Esperanza but are still causing concern, and there are complaints in the lower Milpas area. And I'm wondering if it's possible to work with Casa Esperanza or something like that to determine if there are concerns about certain individuals. This is why I think it's a community service liaison who's there, who know the individuals. Are they clients of Casa Esperanza? Are they sleeping somewhere else? Are they connected at all? Were they thrown out of Casa Esperanza? So what is the connection? Because there's been concerns, and rightfully so. The interpretation of those concerns, I think, are still open because we don't have good data or we don't have good information about the cause and effect kind of thing. And this creates a whole bunch of other social issues and, a lot of debates that we hear from a lot of people. So I'm wondering if that is something worth looking into to really try to determine, what's going on, especially in the lower Milpas area. Or if you're already doing that and we just don't know about it, that would be good to know, too.
We are actually on the cusp of a new program. It's called our Top 3 program. Each community service liaison in every area that they work identify the 3 people that are causing the most concern that they're hearing from their businesses. For those people that are working the beachfront and the Milpas Street corridor, they're going to have monthly meetings with Casa Esperanza to find out if these people are actually accessing services from them, either through their day center or having a bed there. And if so, they're going to enact the good neighbor policy to sanction them from services rendered because of the behavior in the neighborhoods. So this is one of the first steps in actual integration between the 2 programs.
Okay.
I do appreciate the fact that you point out there were some growing pains in the beginning, but I think the credibility that we've been able to build with all the social agencies locally has really benefited the community as a whole.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's great to hear about that program, because there's still plenty of others I know who do use the shelter there, who are turning their lives around, and we want to have them have the best opportunity to do so. So that, I think that's a good approach to take and to work with the organization.
As a point of note, in Comstat, we're seeing that actually calls for service have been dropping in the beachfront area, but we're seeing an increase in Upper Milpas. So it looks like those people that have been displaced due to the lack of beds have moved kind of north. So
Right.
we're looking at that, and we have great data through Comstat to be able to address our enforcement actions as
And
well.
I know there's different levels of communication with your team depending on which business you're talking about. So some are more lenient, and some, which causes problems to neighbors. And yeah, so well, good. That's good to hear. Thank you, Mr. House.
Just very briefly here, this is, I mean, I hope a lot of people in Santa Barbara watch this part of our budget hearing. It's really a big issue, as you know, in the community. And so we get these emails and letters that say things like, and it's really hard because, your conscience gets tugged on this kind of stuff, and they say, Santa Barbara's really going downhill. I mean, I've got friends that have moved out of Santa Barbara because of the homeless situation, and, tourists are just, it's just a terrible situation for people coming to Santa Barbara, and why aren't you, City Council, doing something about it? What's the matter with you that you don't just take care of this problem, just like as if it could happen? And I just wanted to maybe just give you a chance to respond. You're right there on the front lines of this, dealing with the real folks on the street, and what do you say to people who have this fear or this concern about our response to this kind of the indigent and the people that are really in these kinds of situations, I mean, for good or ill?
Well, unfortunately, many of the complaints are directed towards activity that is not illegal. Some of these people are unsightly, not well kept, and their presence in the downtown corridor or Milpas corridor, wherever that may be, while unsightly, is not necessarily illegal. I do look for ways to be creative to fix or adjust our resources to affect change positively. 600 State Street is a great example of an area that I keep trying to affect some innovative change. We're doing 2 new things down there that I'm very excited about. We're seeing enforcement go up and the problems are starting to go away. But what we've done is we've displaced those people now to First East Haley Street, so now we've got a complaint from the hotel there. Once we address that, then they go into Vera Cruz Park. So in many ways, we're chasing our tail, and so we're very cognizant of the enforcement aspects that we need to take when we see an enforcement problem. We'll continue to reach out and use our restorative policing program the way that we are, but many of the people we're talking about are those people that just don't want services.
Mm-hmm. And the thought that somehow you're going to put them in the jail or something that's going to solve it. There's a revolving door syndrome that we've been facing forever, and you seem to be the breath of fresh air in that whole crazy situation where there's a permanent solution possibly for some of these folks.
The jail is overcrowded, and we're going to continue filling it up if we just keep arresting people. This is a complete different approach to it that is having, I think, long-term beneficial effects. One thing I would say is that all of our enforcement aspects end in a positive note. If I arrest somebody and get them into jail, then I can talk to them while they're sober. They're not speaking to us through the bottle. Therefore, we can try to find a way to get them back into a life of dignity. What was it that got them excited about getting out of bed in the morning? And that's sometimes the first step to getting people on track.
I really hope you can feel the appreciation and the encouragement from up here in the dais. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ed.
Actually, we do have one public comment speaker who wants to speak on this topic, so I thought instead of having him, he might want to sit through the whole rest of the budget presentation. No offense to the rest of the department.
Got somewhere to be,
but I
though.
thought Go
you.
right ahead, Mr. Collier.
Thanks, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Bill Collier. I'm the Executive Director of the Downtown Organization, and I'm here before you today to request continuation of the Enhanced Restorative Policing Program. As you know, that since the economic downturn 4 or 5 years ago, as mental health and addiction programs were cut due to lack of funding, we've seen a huge increase of those needing help downtown. We also have seen the proven success just today of the restorative policing, working together to help the homeless get off the street and into restorative court program. Quite often the problem is addiction, so success can be measured as the amount of time this person isn't a burden on the community and our resources. We believe this enhanced program does and will diminish nuisance crimes like public intoxication and aggressive panhandling that offend locals, tourists, and merchants negatively, affecting sales tax and TOT revenues. Please continue this very important program. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great job. Thank you. Wanted to add
Thank you, Sergeant.
Thanks, Ed. Before we get to the numbers, over the last few years, we've continued what we call crisis intervention training that I mentioned about 5 years ago. We continue to work with County Mental Health on putting together a curriculum to train police officers. We've extended it to the Sheriff's Department, and we are now in the middle of training all the police departments in the county, the Sheriff's Department, CHP, and also MTD bus drivers, and it's been very, very exciting. It is very expensive training, but fortunately the County Mental Health and I were able to secure a 3-year grant for the next 3 years to provide crisis intervention training to all law enforcement officers, and we continue to send all of our officers to this training every year so that they can assist, and they're not in these statistics, by the way. All those great numbers are Ed's numbers. So what is not up there is how many times a patrol officer on routine patrol, if you will, also makes these types of contacts and refers them to Ed and the outreach workers. So everybody's getting involved in this, and we're fortunate to get this 3-year grant, and we will continue to train over and over all of our officers to deal with it, not just Ed and his folks. But today, those great numbers were from Ed's folks alone. So we're very happy with what's going on, and we appreciate your appreciation of this program. I'm going to turn it over to the Deputy Chief for a little bit. We're going to go right down to the numbers and share with you some P3 highlights at the end.
Good afternoon, members of council. Frank Mannix from the Santa Barbara Police Department. I'm going to walk us through the general fund. As you know, the police department is primarily funded almost entirely through the general fund. If we take a look at our appropriations by major object, what we see here is that the vast majority is salary and benefits, 87%. So when we're talking about increases to the budget or decreases to the budget, as the case may be, we're almost always talking about either increases or reductions in this area right here. Next, you'll see supplies and services. These are our contracts with different companies that provide us services. These also are the 5200 series line items, for example, gasoline, bullets, equipment, things of that nature. Our allocated costs are distributed by, therefore, telephone equipment, rent, electricity, things that are allocated to us by the intercity services, and then equipment. Less than 1% of our budget is dedicated towards equipment. We are submitting a $55.8 million budget this year, which is a slight increase over last year, and I'll be going over that. I'm sorry, 35.8.
I was feeling really good right there.
It's the problem from looking through these to looking through this. See, I messed up there a little bit. I'm sorry. If we take a look at how that money is distributed, we see the salary and benefits column right here represents a 3.4% increase, which is kind of interesting. It's almost exactly the same increase that you heard from the fire department, and it's going up for the exact same reasons. MOU adjustments, PERS rates increase, as well as we have approached almost full staffing, each year we get a little step increase with the new officers. So we do see a slight increase here. Supplies and services are going up. Interesting, this is about a $25,000 increase. We buy our fuel out of this area, and we do burn about 80,000 gallons of gasoline a year. And if gas goes up just 30 cents a gallon, that will attribute to our $25,000 increase right there. And then we are seeing a slight decrease in our expenditures for major equipment purchases. Basically, we buy the equipment as we need it, and this year we just didn't need as much as we have in previous years. So overall, we're seeing a relatively modest increase, almost all attributable to salaries and benefits. These are our major revenue sources. As you can see, parking citation is almost 50% of all the revenue that we generate. We generate about $5.6 million in total departmental revenues. I think everyone's familiar with how parking services works in Santa Barbara, but we do generate those fees. Helps pay for the employees who enforce those sections. Fees and charges, these are vehicle release fees, these are cost recovery fees, these are fees that we get to run the JPA, the Joint Powers, which funds our IT manager. So these are fees that we collect in that area. Intergovernmental services, for example, this is a reimbursement to the City of Santa Barbara for crossing guards from the school district. They provide us a reimbursement. This is also when we get grants from the state of California. We categorize it in this area. Animal licensing accounts for about 3%. Prop 172 is our share of state sales tax, 4% of our overall budget. Traffic safety, these are fines that we get when we write traffic tickets, account for approximately 9%. We do get a reimbursement to offset the cost of running our street sweeping program from Public Works. So that is a no-cost item to the police department because we are able to reimburse for that. And then municipal court fines, these are the fines that we get from the county when we're able to collect on municipal code violations. If we see how this translates over the last few years here, you'll see that this year we're reporting or forecasting a 6.9% decrease. However, there's really one major reason for that. And if you look at this category right here, 53.9% in the intergovernmental, the reason why we're only budgeting at this time 316 versus a more standard amount of 700 or 600,000 is these are the grants that we get in mid-year from the state of California. We've been getting them almost every year, but they're very difficult to budget. So what we do is when we receive those grants, we prepare a council agenda report, and City Council will accept the funds at that time. So it's likely that by the end of the year, this value will look more like this value. And when that happens, this value will go almost to zero, and this value will shrink down to less than 1%. So it's a little bit alarming when you look at it, but because we can't predict exactly what the state's going to do, we've represented it this way. But our overall suspicion is it's going to be less than 1%.
A question, actually,
Yes.
back to animal licensing, because it still comes up periodically. I know we recently changed the structure where we're working with a company in Texas, I believe, who's creating the licensing, but my understanding was that to the resident, it shouldn't make any difference. They could still interact with someone in Santa Barbara to get their license, although I'm still getting periodic reports saying I have to do something with someone in Texas. So can you clarify for us what the process is for?
Last year, we outsourced to Texas. Some people like it because they get to do it online. They get to pay for it with a credit card. It gets mailed to them, and they never have to leave their homes. And quite frankly, those people who really like it, we probably never hear from. Some people do like to come to the police department, and we were referring them, well, you got to go online to Texas. And when we were hearing these complaints, we decided we had to do something a little different. So now we keep a supply of license in the lobby that we kind of arrange for Pet Data, the company, to send to us so that we can do those few people who insist upon buying it in person, they can do so at the police department. And it seems to work.
Okay. All right. So go online. It's the easiest way to go, but if necessary, you have it for Fido or whomever, something there at the headquarters. Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
We're going to shift gears and talk about staffing levels because we know that's always very important to council. But before we begin, I want to talk a little bit about some of the terms that we're going to use, just so we're all familiar. It's sometimes helpful to think of staffing as three different subsets. One is authorized strength. These are the number of police officer positions that are funded in the budget. So each year when we're talking about authorized positions, they're bought and paid for in the general fund. Operational strength are the number of officers that we've actually been able to hire and are on the payroll. Because when we have vacancies, there'll be a difference between this number and this number. And then finally, functional strength are those officers who actually are able to report to duty. There's a variety of reasons why officers can be operational. We've got them on the payroll, but they could be injured, they could be trainees in the academy, they could be on special assignment where they're not in the field, they could be on military leave. There's a number of reasons why they can't be here. And then finally, vacancies and overhires are pretty general terms that we're all familiar with. So it's helpful to think of these terms as subsets of each other. This is what's budgeted, this is what we've hired, and these are the people who are actually showing up. This next slide's a little complicated to look at, but it has a lot of data, and it's important to spend a few moments looking at this. I think you've seen this slide over the last several years, and when we first reported this information, we see in fiscal year 10 we were authorized at 140. Operational, we had quite a few vacancies at that time because we found that no police agencies were running police academies. So we had a hard time getting our officers trained, and in fact, we've been sending our people to San Bernardino to get trained out there with very good results, I might add. But as a result, our functional strength dropped down to 121. So we had 121 actually performing police services in fiscal year 10 on that day that I presented at the council. Last year, we were able to pick up some positions, and I'm sorry, this is in the middle of the budget crisis where we actually had to lose a few positions. Those positions were vacant positions that we're unable to hire out on. But interestingly enough, you'll notice that our functional strength actually increased. And that's because some of the factors that can reduce our officers from this number to this number were not in play. So some of our officers may have returned from long-term injury. Some of them may have been coming out of training and gotten into the field. It's a little bit analogous to having water in the garden hose and waiting for it to come out of the other end. But what's important to see right here, as of today, because last year council restored 4 positions, we were able to bump up our operational strength quite a bit, but our functional strength is very good compared to where it's been for the last 2 years. 131. And the reason why this is able to be is if you look at the difference between authorized strength and operational strength, it's very small. So we've hired out on our vacancies, we've gotten our people, and this has been a very aggressive, sustained hiring program to make this happen, and now we're seeing the good results of it right here. So what's going to happen in next fiscal year? Well, once again, we're proposing 141. We believe our operational strength will be about what it is right now. And then our functional strength, this is our best guess. However, we must realize that when it comes to injuries and things that are simply out of our control, we're never really sure. This is why we say it fluctuates on a daily basis. Because on any given day, people can come back. We have one officer who's recently returned from overseas deployment. He's going to be rejoining our department in June, so that'll be a shot in the arm. We also have another officer who's in academy in a training function. He'll be coming back. So we're hoping that this number will stay high. However, as long as this number and this number are close to each other, then this number will simply be the best it can be under any given circumstances. So this is a result of our aggressive hiring. We're going to continue doing that, and as a result, we'll have our best possible scenario for functional strength.
Mr. Hotchkiss has a question.
Hi. Is that a typical, there's about 8% difference there. Is that typical for forces around the country? Do you know?
You know, that's data I just don't have.
Okay.
This is typical for us. We normally have about 8 to 10 people on some sort of injury or other assignment. We call it an IOD other, injured on duty / other, and could be maternity leave. There's just a a lot of reasons why someone doesn't show up for work, and about 8 to 10 is average.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have notice there's a vacancy, which, so that was recent. So are we looking at hiring some more, or you have a next round of hiring due to any future retirements happening?
Yes, Madam Mayor and Council. We're aggressively, we're in the midst of deciding who goes to a background. We're probably going to we're looking at about 50 people to go to a background. We're anticipating for sure 2 retirements by December, maybe more. So we're working towards an October Academy. And the October Academy, depending on what happens, we may end up sending 5 or 6 to the Academy in October. So that's where we are, and we're continuing to aggressively do that.
Yes, Deputy Chief Mannix. Just a quick question about the dynamics of the decision-making process, where we are right now and where we've been. So as I recall, in fiscal year, maybe Chief Sanchez, you can help correct me if I'm wrong, but I think fiscal year 2007, 8, 9, and 10, the council had authorized 140 for hiring, and as we got to the latter years, 9 and 10, I think we authorized over-hiring if it were necessary, if it could help. And yet we had a operational strength that was, in the lower numbers, and of course that affected the functional strength. But clearly, there's been some shift or change which has managed to really get our numbers up there, and I think we're all very grateful for that, including the shifting of 2 of the sworn officers that were on kind of a desk duty, and now they're out in the field. So that all that working together has gotten us where we are here, and I think we're grateful. But what's the dynamic that moves between an authorization here and the actual numbers of folks that have been hired, recruited, and retained, I guess, that get us to where we are today?
It's an aggressive hiring posture that we've taken on, and plus we have been benefited by the overhire permission. The city administrator has given us permission, and it was granted by council.
I have to correct you. We gave you permission. We're the ones that said to overhire. But I just bring that up. I don't mean to interrupt that way. I'm sorry, but it is something that I know we've talked about for a number of years. So we're good. We're grateful that it's seeing improvement. But it's something I know all 7 of us, and there have been different 7s up here who have said that for many, many years. So that's good.
Well, we've taken it very seriously.
Good.
That's for sure. Captain Torres has been leading the charge in admin services to get people hired. And there's been a lot of direction from council that's been translated through the rank structure at the police department to get these people hired. And we've considered it a major goal on our part to do so. So, there is no doubt that over the last few years there's been a big internal push. We've also hired some hourly background investigators who are former police officers who used to do backgrounds for us. And that's given us a big resource, because putting someone through background is a major challenge. And I never wanted to be in a position where I could have sent more people to the academy had I only gotten people through. I will say this last go-around, it was very slim pickings in the off the list. We have one officer who is in the academy, started just a few weeks ago, and we could have sent more, but we didn't find any qualified people other than that one on the list. As a result, we've just started a new testing that I think you were briefed on last month. And we got, how many people showed up? 700? Yeah, so we have a fresh list, 700. You lose about 50% during the written test, and then you lose another 50% or sometimes less during the oral interview process. So the herd gets culled out pretty quick, but we do hope to get some qualified people. The next academy is going to be starting in the fall, and we almost certainly will be putting people into that.
Well, Deputy Chief Mannix, I want to thank you for that. I mean, it's just, it wasn't to ding you or anything. I just want to understand that relationship, because there's the policy board interest in having numbers like what we have now, and clearly something's working, but also for the future, we want to make sure that we maintain that effort so that we don't go back again. So I really do appreciate your answering as thoroughly as you did. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just the past conversation raised this question in my mind. In the functional strength over the years, how would you put someone who is an active officer who's working in dispatch? Would they be, for example, I mean, that business about moving people, we've got folks that were doing administrative activities who now are able to be out on the street, as it were. Did that show up in the functional strength before, since they were in dispatch and they were working? They were part of the functional strength?
They are not part of the functional strength.
They were not.
So they are part of that.
They would be part of the operational strength
right,
at that point.
Because they're really not doing the job they were trained to do.
Okay.
And they're helping us out tremendously in dispatch, but they're trained to be in the field, and they're not due to staffing considerations in dispatch, so they are not part of functional strength.
Thank you. And then secondly, obviously the country has been at war for these many years, and we are actually have fewer folks overseas these days as a country. Is that reflected in this department's participation in military activity at this point?
Well, we do participate. We do support the troops, and the council does. Other than what's happening there, we support our people. And we currently have no one over there. But prior to your coming on the council, at one time we had 6 or 7 there at the same time a few years ago. At the exact same time they left. It was unbelievable. 4 of them actually were in heavy combat, and all those 4 that were in heavy combat were in the same platoon. And that's when it was the most people we've had. We've had some go over twice. We had some go over 3 times. Matt Tinello, I think it was 3 times, and it continues. But right now we have plenty of people who could be called, but currently we have no one overseas.
Are they all back? So they're all back?
Everyone's back.
So there you go, Mr. Tonkin. That's the story for you, I think. They're just sort of pitching story. Mr. Rouse, that's incredible.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Captain Mannix, as you go into this the ebb and flow of the recruitment and training and all that, how do laterals in and laterals out play into your operational strength or your operational strength?
A lateral is someone who's currently working or has worked for another police department, and they're looking to join our department. We have hired laterals in the past. I will tell you that sometimes we've been a little disappointed with some of the laterals that we've hired. They've come into us with a glowing background, and we went to hire them, but some of them will go on again and leave our department to go for yet another department, or some of them have just not been able to perform the Santa Barbara way. So I am an advocate of growing them from the barrel, getting them straight from the tree and training them right in the beginning and have them perform police services the way we expect it to be done in Santa Barbara. But we won't just immediately turn our back on the lateral list. When we're in need of hiring officers, we review the lateral list with HR, and if we can find some on there that really look good, and some of the sheriff's departments have come on and been successful with our department, then we'll hire them.
And conversely, then, are we affected greatly by lateral out?
Not at this time, and not in the last several years.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So finishing up with our staffing discussion here, you can see that our furlough hours are projected to end, and just that alone will add an entire police officer position to our rank and file. So we were furloughing more than one police officer position, so it'll be nice to have that back. Obviously, it's going to be an incremental increase distributed throughout the entire department, so we're not going to see a major change. But it is nevertheless the equivalent of one full-time police officer. What do we need to maintain the status quo? Well, obviously, I talked about this already. We need to aggressively recruit and overhire as needed. Now, in the past, we've overhired almost continually because we couldn't get up to our authorized strength value. But now we'll just overhire as needed based upon our projections for retirements, et cetera, et cetera. We traditionally lose and must replace 7 officers a year. for retirements, terminations, laterals out, whatever the case may be. So we know that going in, that on an average year, it's going to be 7 officers, and we'll overhire in order to forecast for some of those predicted vacancies. And then obviously, in order to maintain our staffing, we talked about it earlier, we need to keep this number and this number very close to each other. And as this number begins to separate it, as it did here, then it's going to impact our levels of services. So right now, for the last several years, you can see this number has been moving in the right direction. I find it interesting to note that it even moved in the right direction during the middle of the worst of the budget crisis. It's continued to increase, and this number has dramatically increased, and we're hoping to keep it up high. At this time, the patrol captains will come up, or Lieutenant Whittam, soon to be Captain Whittam, will discuss his division highlights.
Thank you, Deputy Chief, and congratulations to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Madam Mayor and Council. I'm Dave Whittam. I'm soon to be the Patrol Division Commander, and I'm going to talk as a kind of a broad overview of the Patrol Division and where we're going and where we've been in the past year. And one of the main measures that we look at to be successful is our response time to calls for service, because one of the things that we do is we respond. We are the men and the women out on the streets in the patrol cars and the uniforms that respond in the most visible portion of the police department. So as we've gone through this past year and through our CompStat analysis, we have specific P3 goals that we're meeting in our priority of calls. Priority ones, which are the most important calls, is somebody that calls 911 and there is a Part 1 crime or a very serious crime. Those are the ones where we're going to be there, and we have a response time under P3 that calls for a 7-minute response minimum. And during that, we've met that goal over the past year. And one of the things that we look at in CompStat is individually those calls. And an important thing to look at is, what are those calls? Are there any anomalies in there that are throwing those off? And we look at those very specifically. And over the past year, what I've also done is looked at those criminal-type calls and then those non-criminal. A non-criminal would be, say, a traffic collision, an injury, or a unknown if injury-type traffic collision. And when we look at those and we take those and we separate them, not that they're not a priority 1 call, we will reduce that even by about 1.5 to 2 minutes. So we have in the 4 to 5 minute range of a call for service when we look at just those purely a crime is happening and we need to be there. So that's a very good response time for when people really need our help. So in terms of response times, when we look at the other priorities, the priority 2s, 3s, and 4s, of which we have, and looking and maintaining those goals, we've done a very good job with that. The Patrol Division in the past year has reaped the benefits of what the Deputy Chief has spoken of with the very aggressive hiring policy, because as we look at staffing issues, staffing of the Patrol Division, what our target is 61 officers, and when we get above that 50 range of functional strength, that's when we have the ability to keep those numbers and lower those response times for service. So the Patrol Division has reaped the benefits from that aggressive hiring. If you'll notice, with our department, we have quite a few specialties. We have motor officers, as Ed has spoken of, the tactical patrol force. We have a gang suppression team. And what that allows us to do is create efficiencies. And efficiencies is the sense of specializing in those certain areas of crimes where we can reduce calls for service. And we do a very good job at that. And as Ed spoke of with restorative policing, we've targeted those areas and those issues. And in that, we're going to reap the benefits of reduced calls for service for the officers as we take care of those specialized crimes and those issues. As we get into staffing issues, I forecast that it's going to get better. We've seen an increase in the staffing with our functional patrol strength. So one of the things that we looked at to increase efficiencies as well is, prior to January, the Patrol Division we had 6 teams. And those teams were split between a 10-hour schedule and a 12-hour shift schedule. We've had that for about the last 8 years. So we looked at that in terms of, is that the most efficient way to do business as an operation? And a committee was formed, and we decided to go back to an all 10-hour program for all the officers, maintaining the 6 teams that we have. So what we've done is we've created where staffing is needed the most, which we have a very active nightlife, which is in the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday in the downtown corridor, is to attempt to increase the staffing during those times with a minimum amount of team strength of 13 with an overall strength of a minimum of 18. We've been able to achieve that with a very minimal amount of overtime. So that's one of the highlights that we've done in the past year since January, is to increase those areas of where we needed staffing the most. And those are the highlights of the patrol division.
Now we'll have Captain Altavilla discuss highlights in the Investigative Bureau.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of council. Alex Altavilla, I'm the the Investigative Division Commander. I want to talk real briefly about the mission and kind of the way the Investigative Division is structured. Our mission in the Investigative Division is to investigate and resolve all assigned criminal cases, including the high-tech crime cases, to a successful conclusion or until we've actually exhausted all the leads. As the chief said earlier, the way the investigative division is broke down as far as teams are concerned is we have crimes against persons, crimes against property, our youth services section, which handles gang-related crimes, narcotics, and also our crime lab, which is a subset or overseen by our crimes against persons unit. Right now, the investigative division is on track to achieve all of their P3 goals for this fiscal year in the investigative division and in the crime lab. I want to talk real briefly about some of the challenges and some of the investigative division enhancement that we've made to go ahead and improve service to the community in each one of our teams. In the crimes against persons unit, we have implemented a major investigations team, and this actually was a team that was came from the team level. A sergeant and a detective got together, and it consists of 13 sergeants and detectives and officers that are highly trained, and they will come out and respond to significant events like officer-involved shootings, homicides, and they also actually carry our cold case homicides and our Article 4 homicides. So in essence, instead of having one detective responsible for all 26 of our cold cases and Article 4 homicides, this team, which meets actually on a monthly basis, is responsible for those duties. And we've actually seen some really good success along those lines. The crime lab, with the increase in what we've seen the criminals using as far as smartphones are concerned, we have updated our training and the software to be able to go ahead and access those smartphones to look for text messages, photographs, data, those kind of things. And that's actually been working out really well to go ahead and link together a lot of these criminal elements. The crimes against property section. AB 109, the state's realignment process, is probably going to be one of the most challenging things as an organization, as a city, and as an investigative division we're going to have to go ahead and deal with. We have seen, obviously, an increase in property crimes because a lot of these individuals realize that they're going to get very, very, they're not going to be going to state prison, and they're going to spend very little time in the county jails, and they're right back out to go ahead and reoffend. What we are doing to try to combat this is working very closely with probation, who is now responsible for this realignment population. There is an $18,000 grant that we utilize with probation to go out and search for and arrest offenders that are currently on probation, that are in violation of their probation terms and conditions. So we're trying to stay on the offense as far as these offenders are concerned. The youth services section, obviously we just had a major cleanup along the railroad corridor regarding graffiti. One of the things that we are using for the last several years has been our graffiti tracker program. This allows us to go ahead and, with the use of GPS cameras, take photographs, analyze and link together a lot of these different elements of graffiti, and when there is an arrest, we're able to go ahead and link together these cases and present them to the district attorney's office and prosecute several different cases, and also work towards restitution for the victims of those crimes. I have to go ahead and thank Public Works, specifically Browning Allen, for this year, because I did fall short of a donation that we used when we started this program last year, and Browning and I worked out the finances of it, and were able to go ahead and continue with Graffiti Tracker for another year, and also actually purchase another GPS camera, which we have one, and also Public Works goes out and uses them also.
Excuse me, Captain. Do we have a system now where somebody out in the field with a iPhone or whatever can snap a picture of graffiti, send it to you, and that will tell you exactly where it is, GPS-wise, so that the whole system is seamless, if I can put it that way?
And that's the way the Graffiti Tracker system is structured. Basically what it is there's these GPS cameras. If we get a call for service, or if a patrol officer comes upon some vandalism, be it graffiti or gang related, they can go out, they can take a photograph of it, and this photograph, the coordinates and the photograph itself are downloaded into the Graffiti Tracker system.
But what I mean is a member of the public could do it. In other words, I take a picture of my iPhone, send it to you, and it goes into the system. You're automatically informed where the graffiti is, and you can see what it is.
Councilmember Hotchkiss, there's not at this time. There isn't that infrastructure to go ahead and support that.
Looking forward to that.
However, we realize that we like to have the graffiti cleaned up as soon as possible. So if the public feels that they want to go ahead and, obviously we like to be called out first to be able to go ahead and take the photograph and the report. If that's not the case and they want to paint it out, get the photograph, and we can also get there, take the report, and then we can download that information.
So if I took a picture of it, is there any place I could send it? Because I got GPS on my phone. It'll tell you exactly where it is.
Not at this point in time. There's no way to actually send that data.
I think in our information technology presentation earlier, IT is working on a program like that, rolling it out, in a year or so? Yeah. So stay tuned. Thank you.
And then I'd like to talk about some of the major cases that we've had throughout the year in the investigative division, touching on each one of the teams that we have. May 4th was the third-year anniversary of the Lyons double homicide on the Mesa. And that took, obviously, 3 times to go ahead and try, and a tremendous amount of work by the police department, the district attorney's office, to go ahead and bring that to a successful conclusion. And currently, Mr. Lyons is set to be sentenced on May 29th for those crimes. In regards to Article 4s, or talked about Article 4 and cold case homicides, Miguel Godoy Morales was one of those cases that in 1984 he was responsible for the stabbing homicide at Olive and Haley Street, and he fled to Mexico. We were able to go ahead and work that case with our partners in DOJ and the Mexican authorities and arrest Mr. Morales several months ago in Tijuana, and he's currently being prosecuted in Mexico. From the crimes against property section, I think we're all familiar with the Montecito Motors case. Chet and Adam Taylor. Again, it was an arrest of over 55 felony counts, over $1 million in thefts. And again, that was a joint effort between the police department, the district attorney's office, and the state franchise tax board. And it appears that they actually may be reaching a disposition of that case, and sentencing is tentatively set for May 17th in regards to a plea agreement. Another one that was really concerning was Zetlo Brown. He was the gentleman that in August of 2011 went ahead and stabbed a black gentleman on State Street in the head with scissors. He was on parole. He was a white supremacist gang member, and he's currently being prosecuted for mayhem, hate crime, and also will be probably the first white supremacist gang enhancement prosecution that we will have in Santa Barbara. And then finally, one that I think that speaks to everything the police department does as far as prevention, intervention, and enforcement was the arrest of Leopoldo Jimenez Gonzalez. This was actually a search warrant that I was able to go ahead and go on. They invite me on them from time to time. It was December of 2011, search warrant in the first block of South Aliso Street. When we made entry, we found, the suspect had 7 ounces of methamphetamine. However, he was able to go ahead and basically secrete himself in a rented room with a really great family, a husband, wife, and 2 really great kids. It was tense there for a period of time. It always is, going in and, making entry and making sure you know who the crooks are and who the innocent people are. But after that was over with, he was a deported felon. He's currently being prosecuted federally. And after things settled down, my detective sat down with the kids, and it was around that Christmas time, and they asked him what their Christmas wishes was, and I was able to go ahead and make a phone call and to our Police Activities League, and they went ahead and in the next couple of days went out there and delivered gifts, brand new bicycles, and helmets to the kids. So I think that really showcases what the police department is all about when it comes down to every element of prevention, intervention, and enforcement that we go ahead and partake in. And I thought that was a significant case. So that wraps up the investigative division.
Thank you, Captain. And one more.
And now Captain Torres will discuss the Administrative Services Division.
Madam Mayor, members of council, my name is Captain Gil Torres. I'm the captain of the Administrative Services Division. We kind of handle everything that's not crime related. We do all the infrastructure with records, IT, communications, the hiring, everything like that. And it's a pretty big division as far as responsibilities, but one of the most important is obviously in our hiring. We talked a little bit about it earlier, taking a very aggressive hiring stance. We've worked real closely with HR to deal with, some of the keeping our staffing up. We live in an internet age now. We're getting, I think, in the last fiscal year, we had 6,200 applications for police officers. So, but a lot of them, we get it from all over the country. So we actually had almost 1,400 actually show up to take the written test. That's still quite a lot. It's very labor intensive because then out of that you get about half of them that show up for the written, and we have to staff interviews, and it's quite an endeavor. But HR has been doing a very good job working together with us to accomplish this. And as time goes on, the numbers it gets smaller. By the time we get them for our final interview, our in-house interview, we look at probably maybe the top 100 out of that group. And then in that, I personally sit on those interviews when we do the in-house. That's where we select to put them into background. Unfortunately, that's where we lose most of the people, because in the background process, they take polygraph examination, psychological, all those type of tests. And then the numbers just whittle down real fast. And then we have an academy, and we've lost people in the academy too. So it's very difficult. It's very labor intensive, but we like to say we get a very good product when we're done. We have really high standards, and we kind of stick to them. But it is a challenge. So, and we do that pretty much for all our employees, for dispatchers, records, anything like that. We also handle information technology, and one of the highlights is doing assessments for in-camera video systems. We've pretty much concluded our pilot program. We looked at several different companies, and we've narrowed it down to a few. And one stands out amongst the group right now because it's kind of an integrated system where we could actually use. We've budgeted for some monitors for our police cars, the mobile data computers, and we can kind of use some of that money that we budgeted for the computers actually to apply towards this camera system. So my IT staff should be giving me some recommendations that we can go out to bid probably by the end of this fiscal year. So that's moving on real well. One of the things I got involved this year was also, we obviously, different council, but in 2007, we identified a lot of deficiencies in our police building. There were structural issues. The facility was just in poor shape, and during that study, we found out some significant seismic issues, and we really identified a specific vulnerable area, which was our 911 emergency dispatch center, which sits in the basement of the police station. If we were to have a seismic event, and we had to say the building was condemned, we could move pretty much operations anywhere else, any other building, a tent. But the communications, you're not going to move that anytime fast. So we were very vulnerable because we would be in pretty bad shape with fire, police, ambulance. So staff directed us to look for some different locations in the city. We worked with Public Works. We looked at various places, and we came up with building in the Granada Garage, a new facility, steel structure, had a generator, it just fit perfectly for what we needed for a temporary location. We worked with Public Works architects with some redevelopment funds, and we did some preliminary design studies, and we came up with a pretty much an assessment and preliminary designs for that structure. So it's kind of on hold now till we know what's going to happen with the funding for that, but it was quite an endeavor. And the same thing is in that, I think that pretty much includes, also with the building, we did a needs assessment with the architects, and that's pretty much completed, and it's just this funding issues now for that. Any questions?
Mr. Rouse has a question.
Yeah, Captain Torres, you mentioned, talked about the in-car video cameras, and I was curious about that earlier when we talked about in the equipment proposal appropriations is down slightly. I don't know, is that been budgeted for, or is that still on hold? Are we doing is it the pilot program doesn't have a...
I can speak to that. It is not being funded through the police department. It's being funded through the city's capital program. However, I can tell you where the funds are actually coming from. The police department has an asset forfeiture fund. This is primarily a holding account that the department operates when we conduct narcotic enforcement and we're able to seize property and the courts award the property to us. We then place it in this account and we wait for times to spend it. Over the years, you will probably recall council agenda reports where we asked city council to appropriate the money from that fund into the police department's general fund so we can spend it on bulletproof vests and car radios and things that we need to run the department. Some of the funding for the cameras is coming out of asset forfeiture money. Also, the state of California gives us money to operate a live scan fingerprint system. This money is also kept in the same fund, Fund 171. What we've realized is the state actually sends us more money than it costs to replace the live scan fingerprint system. About every 5 years you need to buy a new system, and the money that the state apportions to us actually exceeds that value. And what we're able to do now is we're able to take the legitimate cost of the live scan operator that we can attribute to the state money, and we're able to pay for the operator out of that bank of money. So that will exonerate some general fund money that we can use towards the purchase of the camera.
Thank you. I think we're all pretty interested in seeing that happen. So,
Thank you. Related to the last issue on the dispatch center, maybe it's a question for Mr. Armstrong, and then also it's related to the restorative policing funding. Those were two RDA funded items, and I thought last week the dispatch center issue was addressed, or was it? If you could give us an update on those two, that would be great.
To tell you the truth, I know that they dealt with the police building and they turned it down. I'm not sure, I don't think they dealt with the dispatch center, but if the logic that they used on the other areas prevails, I think it's very doubtful that they will find that we can use those funds for the dispatch center.
And what was the budgeted amount, do you know, for the dispatch center?
As I recall, it totals around $2 million.
Million.
There is some funding available for new dispatch, what do they call them, modules or whatever, where the dispatchers actually sit, the grant that we're actually going to receive to replace the consoles, we are hoping to use that in the new facility. We may have to put it back in our existing facility. I think once the decision's made, we'll come to you with some options, because we think that's really a critical project. And then with regards to the restorative policing, that also is an issue where if it isn't funded, we did put some money in your appropriated reserves because we felt that was such a critical project or program that we felt that if it's not funded through by the oversight board, there is funding available for that, but you'll have to make that decision.
For the next fiscal year.
For the next fiscal year.
And did I understand correctly, there was even a question of the funding for this fiscal year that we used, of whether or not we might have to pay that back, or did I misunderstand that?
Remember that the redevelopment agency went out of business as of February 1st. And so some of the money that we've spent between February 1st and now on various parts is potentially at risk. On the flip side, the oversight board, once they just make all their decisions, there will probably be an allocation of some of that. We'll receive 12% of the funds that get released. And so that will then benefit to us, and we're trying to figure out we're at jeopardy. But I think we are at jeopardy on some of the monies we've spent between February 1st and now, for not just some like the restorative policing potentially, but also on a couple of the capital projects that we entered into in that term when the state legislature was passing its law. We're literally in a couple of cases looking at the day we entered into a contract, and was it a day before or after the legislation was effective, and looking at exactly the calendar. And the governor signed it on one day, but the Secretary of State certified it the next day, and we signed it. We actually entered into one contract on the day that the governor signed it, but the day before it was certified by the Secretary of State. We're going to get down to that on a couple issues. But I think in the end, we are at risk on some funding. It's not the kind of thing I'm staying up at night worrying about. I'm more concerned about some of these major projects that, clearly, based on what I'm seeing from the Oversight Board, we're not going to get funding for.
And so the budget hearing for the RDA is a week from today, I think, on the 16th. So we'll have a better sense of...
Not really. I think what we're going to end up having to do is coming back to you, and kind of reconciling all of this after the Oversight Board finishes their deliberations, and then we'll look at we'll look at different sections. We'll look at what do we do with the remainder of this fiscal year, and then more importantly, what do we do next fiscal year. But at this point, at least especially with the restorative policing, I've just told the police department, this is a high priority project for the council. Continue the funding, keep the people doing the job, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do after the fact.
Okay.
The other area that we're looking at, and we will be coming to you relatively soon, is what we talked about with the public works budget, and that's the $300,000 that's at risk for the funding that we give for the shuttle,
right.
Both the downtown waterfront shuttle and also the commuter light shuttles.
Okay. So for the public who've been asking what's going to happen July 1 with restorative policing, the answer is it's going to continue, and then we have to figure out the funding mechanism once all the dust settles.
That's what our intention is, unless you want to do something different.
Okay. Yeah. I don't think so. Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just general question, Chief. Do we know, or do we have figures that say the present size of our police force is appropriate for the population that we have? Is there anything, a standard like that for either California or the nation?
There have been a variety of formulas that people put out. We don't really pay a lot of attention to those formulas because in different cities there's different crime issues, there's different community needs, and it's just really a shot in the dark, really. Years ago, they said you needed one cop per 1,000, and then it changed to 1.1. So I really can't tell you that there's an exact science to it at all. I know that we're at 141 authorized. A few years ago, yes, we had 2 DARE officers. We have none now. We had 6 beat coordinators. We have 3 now. We had 2 school resource officers. We have none now. So it really is, the type of level that you want to do what you have to do. So that's the best answer I could give you. But in terms of a variety of theories and formulas, they've been around for years, and I wouldn't bet the house on any of those formulas, really.
One other question: are we working to get officers out of the cars and onto the streets, walking State or Cabrillo or Milpas?
Well, we've done that with Hove and Burley. We've done it with the non-sworn folks. And remember, my beat coordinators are doing it every week. So we don't necessarily have the officers who are in police cars answering calls for service because they're chasing the radio around. Right now, we don't have the resources to have those officers get out on their beat and walk. We absolutely don't. So what we've done is a large part of what the beat coordinators are doing are exactly what you're talking about. But they don't have calls for service to go to or chase the radio from call to call to call, which gives them that opportunity. And they're all assigned specific beats as their beats. So they're doing it. But we have not had the opportunity to have an officer who's chasing the radio around to get out in between calls to do that. It wouldn't work.
How about the bicycle guys?
Well, Ed has them, and they're all over the place, on foot, on the bicycles, and doing a great job.
Mostly the downtown corridor?
Well, they're on the beaches and the parks, downtown corridor, Milpas corridor, and wherever it's needed. So they're there every day. They have to be completely flexible. But in terms of the patrol team officers doing that, no, we're not doing that.
Thank you.
Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Captain Altavilla brought up AB 109 and the potential for property crime increase. Proactively, should we be involving the community in neighborhood watches, that type of activity?
We're already doing that. In fact, when we up the ante, if you will, the number of beat coordinators, that's exactly what they're doing. In fact, last week I did a half-day retreat with the beat coordinators, with the DO representative, with the East Side representative, a West Side representative, with Mark Alvarado, to sit down and strategize what our needs are in the city, so we can start knocking those down and prioritize them. So we asked all those folks to help us with this, and it turned out to be a very good day, and it really sort of restructured how we're going to do the beat coordinator system. But they are conducting meetings every week. They're doing meetings all the time with communities, with businesses. They've got the command post vehicle out every Thursday at a different part of town. So I think we're doing a pretty bang-up job of it, and what's happening now is that we're putting together a cadre, if you will, of a speakers bureau from our patrol teams to start conducting some of those meetings as well, and Sergeant Harwood's going to put that together in the next 20 to 30 days.
Yeah, as I reflect back on a year of kind of rough media treatment, I really think the best thing that you guys have done is gone out with the beat coordinators, gone out with restorative policing, and having the faces on the street that are actually meeting people, those kinds of things. Probably the best kind of PR we could possibly do is getting people to know the officers outside of their vehicles and on the street and meeting people that are just the regular citizens as opposed to just the perpetrators. So I think that this is sort of a good thing.
It is a great thing, and the other piece that is going on with the beat coordinators is now when they attend a meeting on beat 6, let's say, a few weeks before that meeting actually occurs, they get together with the officers assigned that beat, and if they're working that day or night, those officers go to that meeting, so that they can also hear what's going on in their beat of assignment, not just the beat coordinator, but the officers that respond to the calls for service. That's been going on for about 30 days, and it's working out pretty well. The officers can't stay there a long time because, again, they're on duty and they're chasing the radio around, but they've been going to the meetings as well, and we're pretty happy with it right now.
Well, as Sergeant Olson mentioned, chasing the tail sometimes, and and of course a lot of people that really aren't doing things that are illegal. But I'd like to encourage you to keep chasing your tail because just the presence has a real calming effect out there.
I agree.
Thank you. One couple more things. Sorry. Yesterday at the hearing on Milpas, one of the comments was that there were trucks parked either on or adjacent to Milpas for 3, 4, 5 days. So I'm wondering if we could be a little bit more attentive to illegal parking there. Second thing, when somebody places a 911 call, does it come to our dispatch center, or does it come to a county center, and then if it's for us, it's diverted to us?
If they're in the city, it's going to come to us. If they're in a cell phone, I believe it goes to the CHP, does it not? I'm sorry? We'll get our expert up here.
Yeah.
Councilman Hotchkiss, Mayor Schneider, I just came from the communications center, so I can answer that.
Perfect.
We have an updated 911 communications center. The system itself is called the Viper system. It's the actual 911 system. And what we're currently working on is getting those 911 calls that come from cell phones, because they now have GPS on them, those ones that should be directed into the city. And our it's called a primary answering point. We have ours, the county has theirs, is those ones that are geographically located within the city will be directed directly into our 911 center. The landline phones that are within city limits currently go directly in there. And they're getting so close as to understanding where the freeway is to route those to the highway patrol, and then those within about 25 feet from the freeway come directly into our 911 center.
So right now, or is it just in the near future that GPS system cell phone won't work?
If the cell phone has a GPS on it, not all of them do.
Right.
But the technology is getting better day by day.
Great. Okay, one more question for Chief. Vis-a-vis pedestrians, do we have any way or plans to expand our crossing guard program on a voluntary basis among citizens around schools? More and more, there's been more and more concern about pedestrian safety.
We have not started looking at that. Yeah, people are concerned about it. One of the things that we've suggested is, to get some of the parents to help us out here.
Exactly, right.
We've talked to the schools about that. In years past, when we used to provide the DARE program, we never charged a nickel to all the schools and all the hours and materials that we gave them. So when we got into this little pickle about crossing guards, I asked them, time to kind of give it up a little bit and help us out this time, and maybe get some of your parents to volunteer. We'll train them, but nothing has. That was prior to Dr. Cash, so if he's watching, I want him to not throw anything
Well,
at the
let's hope he hears you, because that's exactly what I meant. And I think that participation is not only cost-saving to the city and security enhancing to the families, but it also gets people involved in the schools.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
I think that's all the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your support. We'll continue to do our best for you. Thank you.
This concludes the budget work session.